Chapter 71. Jianqin faintly smiled. He clasped his hands at the mercenary and said, "Looks like you've been on the Tianyuan continent for quite some time." The mercenary smiled faintly. "It's not that long. It's only been a few years. It's nowhere near as long as the mercenaries who have been on the Tianyuan continent for decades, or even centuries." "May I ask for your name?" Jianqin asked again. "I'm Mu Yin. What about you?" The mercenary was clearly a rather easygoing person. "I'm Jianqin," Jianqin replied. He had already decided that he would use the name Jianqin on the Tianyuan continent in the future. Afterward, Jianqin and Mu Yun began to chat casually. They talked about a few interesting things that had happened on the Tianyuan continent. Although this was the first time Jianqin had ventured out, he had basically learned a few of the not-so-secretive matters of the Tianyuan continent from his time in Kargath Academy. Jianqin even knew a few things that had happened in the past. Mu Yin, on the other hand, had spent quite a few years on the Tianyuan continent, so he was extremely experienced. The two of them could be said to be mutually beneficial, so they talked very enthusiastically along the way. Unknowingly, the two of them had become even closer. When the caravan slowly passed through the huge gates of the fortress, Jianqin discovered a few portraits of himself on the walls. The words Changyang Shoden were written at the bottom of the portraits. The bounty on the portraits was extremely generous as well. If they found traces or clues of Changyang Shoden and were confirmed to be correct, they would be rewarded with 1,000 purple coins. If they used the traces or clues to capture Changyang Shoden, the person who reported the information would receive an additional 4,000 purple coins. A single gold coin was enough to feed a family of 3 for a month. A single purple coin could be exchanged for 100 gold coins. 1,000 purple coins was an extremely large amount of wealth to the majority of mercenaries. It was enough for them to buy a house in the city and live a carefree life. As a result, this reward was an irresistible temptation to the majority of mercenaries. The most tempting reward was undoubtedly the last one. Anyone who captured Changyang Shoden and handed him over to the Huayan sect would immediately receive 100,000 purple coins. Looking at the generous reward that was enough to move anyone, a cold light flashed through Jianqin's indifferent eyes. "Huayan sect, you really think too highly of me. You actually gave me such generous rewards. Not only did you place a bounty on me in the entire kingdom of Jessin, even the mercenary union has issued a mission for me." Jianqin sneered inside. However, he also felt a deep sense of helplessness. On the Tianyuan continent, everything depended on strength. Right now, his strength was insufficient. Faced with the Huayan sect's bounty, he could only change his identity and leave his home, the place he grew up in, and the kingdom of Jessin. Let alone him, even the Changyang Prefecture, one of the 4 great clans of Lore City, had no way to reverse the situation. Sigh. Jianqin inwardly sighed. At this moment, he couldn't help but think of his mother, by Yuntian's reluctant and sorrowful appearance when he left. Thinking of this, Jianqin's eyes revealed a trace of warmth that he had never felt before. However, his eyes immediately became resolute. At this moment, he had already decided that in the future he would wholeheartedly focus on cultivation to increase his strength. Otherwise, with the Huayan sect as large as before, he would never be able to return to the kingdom of Jessin. He would never be able to see his mother again, and he would never be able to continue enjoying this hard-earned, motherly love. In his previous life, Jianqin had been an orphan. He had never experienced the care and concern of his family. Now, not only had the heavens allowed him to reincarnate, they had even bestowed upon him a happy family. In Jianqin's heart, he greatly cherished this hard-earned motherly love and those family members who had truly cared for him. Some people who had lived in happy families since childhood might not be able to understand Jianqin's feelings. However, after being alone for his entire life, Jianqin greatly desired to have family. After all, it was unavoidable for a person to feel a little lonely. On both sides of the gate, there were nearly 200 soldiers standing guard. Their sharp eyes swept over the faces of everyone who passed through the gate. Once they discovered someone whose face they couldn't see clearly, they would be stopped by these guards and carefully compared to the portraits pasted on the wall. Only after confirming that there were no mistakes would they be allowed to leave. Although many of the people stopped were mercenaries with decent strength, they didn't dare to act rashly in front of the border stronghold of the kingdom of Jessin. This was because there were several 100,000 soldiers in the stronghold, and there was no lack of experts among them. If they were to clash with the guards here, their fates could be imagined. The gate of the stronghold was extremely large. Even if 5 carriages were to travel side by side, it wouldn't feel crowded at all. Just as Jianshin's caravan was about to leave the stronghold, a smaller caravan caught up with them at a much faster speed than Jianshin's caravan. When they saw the portraits pasted on the wall of the stronghold, they immediately began to discuss among themselves. Who is the person in the portrait? Why is there a bounty for him everywhere? I didn't expect that even the border stronghold of the kingdom of Jessin would have his portrait pasted on the wall. It seems like this person must have committed many serious crimes. When I passed by 3 cities, his portrait was pasted all over the city. Now, even the mercenary union has issued a bounty for him. That's right. It seems like this person must have committed some serious crime or offended some big shot. Right now, the mercenary union has already raised the bounty for him to an A-rank mission. Furthermore, they have also removed the requirement for mercenaries to accept this mission. This way, even a D-rank mercenary can accept this mission. That's right, and the commission is extremely high. As long as you find traces of Changyang Shangtian, you'll be rewarded with 1,000 purple coins. If you catch someone based on the traces, you'll be rewarded with an additional 4,000 purple coins. What is a mere few thousand? If you can directly capture him and send him to the Huayan sect, you can directly receive 100,000 purple gold. 100,000? Just thinking about it is frightening. I don't think I will be able to earn 100,000 purple gold in my lifetime. Hearing the discussions of the caravan, Mu Yun, who had been chatting enthusiastically with Jianshin, also became interested. Turning his head to look at the portrait pasted on the city gate, he chuckled and said, I wonder what crime this person called Changyang Shoten committed for the Huayan sect to go through so much trouble to capture him. If he was a big shot with great strength, then it would make sense. But on the wanted list, it clearly states that he is only a primary saint. This is very strange. Could it be that a primary saint could do something that would make the Huayan sect so hateful? Could it be that this person called Changyang Shoten peeked at the daughter of the Huayan sect's sect master taking a bath? Hearing Mu Yen's mutterings, Jianshin couldn't help but laugh. He helplessly looked at Mu Yen and said with a smile, Brother Mu Yen, I have stayed in the kingdom of Jessin for more than 10 years and have heard a lot about the Huayan sect. But according to what I know, the Huayan sect's sect master only has 1 son and no daughter. Peeking at the daughter of the Huayan sect's sect master taking a bath is a bit unreasonable. Mu Yin rolled his eyes at Jianshin and said, What do you know? Who said that the Huayan sect's sect master doesn't have a daughter. Perhaps he just happens to have one. It's just that the outside world doesn't know about it. Jianshin helplessly shook his head. In his heart, he decided not to continue discussing the matter of whether or not the Huayan sect's sect master had a daughter. The caravan didn't encounter any obstructions and smoothly left the stronghold. After Jianshin's disguise, no one could recognize his true appearance. Moreover, this disguise technique was very high. Even though Jianshin had only used some ordinary materials to disguise himself, it was still flawless. No one could see through his disguise. Moreover, this disguise technique was something that had been passed down in Jianshin's previous world. Although it seemed simple, it was actually very profound and not easy to learn. In this world, there was probably no such disguise technique. so naturally no one would think of it. Jianshin's face didn't reveal any flaws, so he didn't have to worry about anyone seeing through his disguise. After leaving the stronghold, there was an endless plain. There were very few people on the plain, only scattered caravans walking on the road. This plain wasn't under the jurisdiction of any empire and was a chaotic area. This led to the frequent appearance of bandits and robbers. The caravans walking on this plain were either in groups or escorted by powerful mercenaries. This plain was very vast. The caravan walked on the plain for an entire day and only covered a quarter of the plain. If they wanted to reach the Fenglan Empire, they would have to cross this plain and then pass through a mountain range to reach the Fenglan Empire stronghold. With the caravan's slow speed, it would take them at least 10 days to reach the Fenglan Empire stronghold. After all, the caravan was carrying large caravans of goods, and the road wasn't very smooth. Even if they wanted to speed up, they couldn't. When the sky darkened, the caravan stopped moving forward and camped in a relatively flat place. Nearly 100 tents surrounded the caravan, which was full of goods. Some of the coachmen skillfully unloaded the caravan and fed the horses. Smoke rose in spirals around the tents. Many of the mercenaries were sitting in groups of 3 or 5, chatting while making a fire to roast the meat of magical beasts or cooking some food to fill their stomachs. But among them, if they didn't know each other, then they belonged to the same mercenary group. Most of the mercenaries who were alone were silently sitting on the side, eating the dry food that they had prepared beforehand. Jianshin also took out a tent that he had prepared beforehand from his space belt and then found a flat and dry place to set it up. As a mercenary group that didn't belong to any mercenary group and wasn't on the list of hired members of the caravan, Jianshin was completely responsible for all the consumption and necessities along the way. The caravan wouldn't give him any help. Just as Jianshin's tent was set up, Mu Yin suddenly appeared in front of Jianshin and said, "Jianshin, it seems that you also joined the caravan halfway. Where are you going?" Jianshin nodded and said, "I'm going to the Blue Moon Empire. Brother Mu Yin, what about you?" Chapter 72. At night, Jianshin entered his tent after eating some rations. He sat down and cultivated with a few Class 1 monster cores in his hand. He could encounter danger at any time on the Tianyuan continent. Only with great strength could he ensure his safety. As a result, Jianshin did not want to waste any time on increasing his strength. Moreover, Jianshin knew that he could only return to the kingdom of Jessen and reunite with his family once he became powerful enough to not fear the Huayan sect. Otherwise, he would probably be hunted down by the Huayan sect as soon as he showed his face. It was extremely quiet outside. Only a few light footsteps could be heard from time to time. These were the mercenaries in charge of patrolling the area as they passed by Jianshin's tent. Time passed by quietly, and in the blink of an eye, it was already late at night. At this time, most of the mercenaries in the tents had already entered a state of deep sleep. Even the mercenaries in charge of patrolling the tents had drowsy looks and were in a very lax state. At this moment, a black streak of light suddenly appeared. Using the cover of the night, it quickly flew over from the distance and shot straight at one of the patrolling mercenaries. In the end, it silently struck the mercenary's throat. The black streak of light was clearly a kind of killing force. The mercenary did not even have the chance to cry out before his body collapsed to the ground. The black streak of light was extremely small and extremely fast. It was completely silent as it flew, making it difficult for anyone to detect it. Moreover, the merchant camp was extremely large, and the patrolling mercenary was far away by himself. As a result, no one noticed what had happened after he fell to the ground. After the mercenary fell to the ground, several more black streaks of light quickly shot over from the distance, killing all the patrolling mercenaries who were further away from the tent. Jianshin's tent was located at the outermost perimeter. Among the dead mercenaries, there just happened to be one that was less than 30 meters away from Jianshin's tent. Just as the mercenary that was closest to Jianshin's tent fell to the ground, Jian Chen's ears slightly twitched as he sat cross-legged in his tent, cultivating. His slightly closed eyes abruptly opened, and his eyes turned. Immediately after, Jian Chen immediately bent over and carefully opened a gap in the tent's door to observe the situation outside. Just as Jian Chen opened the door slightly to see what was happening outside, another black streak of light shot over from the distance at an extremely fast speed. It struck a patrolling mercenary in the distance, and the mercenary fell to the ground without making a single sound. Seeing this, Jian Chen's expression changed slightly. He immediately understood that the merchant group had been attacked. However, with the experience of his past life, Jian Chen did not panic at all. He immediately shouted from the tent, "Everyone be careful! There's an enemy attack!" Jian Chen's shout was extremely loud, and everyone in the camp could hear it clearly. As soon as he finished speaking, the originally quiet camp immediately became noisy. Countless mercenaries quickly ran out of their tents. In just a short moment, the originally quiet camp was filled with hundreds of noisy mercenaries. Jian Chen's words were extremely sensitive to the mercenaries who had been roaming the Tianyuan continent for a long time. As a result, when they heard Jian Chen's shout, all the mercenaries ran out of their tents as quickly as possible. The mercenaries who had just run out of their tents habitually scanned their surroundings, but all they saw were their own people. They did not see any traces of the enemy. Enemy attack? Where is the enemy? Who was shouting just now? Where is the enemy? Where is the enemy? Who the F***CK was shouting randomly. Many mercenaries began to shout loudly. If they were to discover that someone was shouting randomly to mess with them, they would not easily let this person off. Not good. Captain Lang Tian, the patrolling Du Moulin, has died. Just as many mercenaries were cursing, a loud voice drowned out all the curses of the mercenaries and rang out from afar. Hearing this, all the mercenaries fell silent. However, at this moment, another 3 black streaks of light shot over from the darkness at an extremely fast speed and struck the chests of 3 mercenaries. The mercenaries who were struck by the black streaks of light did not even have the chance to cry out before directly falling to the ground. Before the 3 mercenaries could fall to the ground, another 3 black streaks of light shot out from the darkness and struck the 3 mercenaries again. The black streaks of light constantly shot over from afar. Using the cover of the night and their completely silent flight, it was difficult to discover their existence. The black streaks of light shot out at an extremely fast rate. In less than a breath's time, over a dozen mercenaries were struck by the black streaks of light and fell to the ground. At this moment, someone finally cried out, "Everyone be careful, there's an enemy." Before the mercenary could finish his sentence, a black streak of light flashed by and shot straight into the mercenary's body. Afterward, the mercenary powerlessly fell to the ground. Everyone quickly scatter and find cover. A tall, middle-aged man with a scar on his face roared. He was dressed in a tight suit and had a tall build. After he finished speaking, a pair of fiery red hammers appeared in the middle-aged man's hands, and he rushed alone in the direction of the black streaks of light. "Captain Lang Tian, be careful!" Seeing the middle-aged man actually rushing alone in the direction of the enemy, many mercenaries cried out in alarm one after another. Their voices were filled with worry. Just as the middle-aged man rushed out a few steps, over a dozen mercenaries who boasted of their strength rushed out and followed closely behind the middle-aged man. They formed a fan shape and rushed in the direction of the black streaks of light. The black streaks of light were still constantly flickering, but this time the shooting angle of the black streaks of light had changed their target. Under the cover of the night, the undetectable black streaks of light were like sharp swords that shot towards the dozen mercenaries who were rushing over. However, since they dared to recklessly charge forward without knowing the enemy's situation, the strength of these mercenaries was definitely not weak. Leader Lang Tian, who was leading the charge, held a pair of fiery red hammers in his hands that flickered with a flame-like red glow. In the pitch-black night, The hammers were like bright lamps that were so eye-catching. Seeing the 2 streaks of light shooting towards him, Captain Lang Tian's eyes revealed a cold smile. He suddenly swung the hammers in his hands and fiercely smashed them towards the 2 black streaks of light. With a light collision sound, Captain Lang Tian's hammers accurately struck the 2 black streaks of light. Afterwards, the black streaks of light silently disappeared. The black streaks of light that could easily take a person's life were actually so weak in Captain Lang Tian's hands. The dozen or so mercenaries following behind Captain Lang Tian were also extremely powerful. They did not fear the threat of the black streaks of light at all. Immediately, powerful Saint force surged out from the Saint weapons in their hands, and they directly dispersed the black streaks of light with a wave of their Saint weapons. Just at this moment, a strange change occurred. Sharp, ear-piercing sounds of air being pierced rang out from the darkness in the distance. Countless arrows were shot over with ear-piercing sounds. There were so many arrows that they were as dense as locusts. Facing so many arrows, a few of the dozen or so mercenaries immediately stopped their charge and blocked the incoming arrows. Ding, 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 ding. These arrows were all made of refined iron. When they collided with the Saint weapons, the sound of metal clanging rang out. Captain Lang Tian and the mercenaries still did not stop their charge. Facing the dense rain of arrows, the mercenaries all roared out angrily. Powerful Saint force surged out of their bodies, forming a barrier completely condensed from Saint force around them. Although this barrier was weak, its defensive power was extremely strong. When the arrows made of refined iron struck their barrier, they could only cause it to tremble slightly. They were simply unable to break through this layer of defense. Brothers, kill! Just as the powerful mercenaries were about to charge into the enemy's camp, a loud and clear shout rang out from the darkness in the distance. Following the shout, earth-shaking battle cries rang out. In the darkness, a large number of black figures could be faintly seen suddenly appearing, rapidly charging towards the caravan's camp. The bandits have appeared. Everyone prepare your bows and arrows. In the mercenary camp, a mercenary loudly shouted. Hearing this, many mercenaries immediately took out the iron longbows on their backs and nocked arrows. They aimed at the black figures in the distance, waiting for the bandits to enter the range of their arrows. Jianshin stood at the periphery of the group of mercenaries and looked at the black figures in the distance. His expression became a little solemn. Although the bandits were still far away from the camp and visibility was very low due to the darkness, with his eyesight and experience, he immediately determined that there were at least a few hundred bandits. They were not much fewer than the mercenaries in the caravan. Moreover, the few powerful mercenaries who had charged forward against the rain of arrows had already been dealt with by the experts in the enemy camp. Release the arrows! At this time, the bandits had already entered the range of the arrows. With the order of one person, the hundreds of mercenaries immediately released the arrows in their hands. Immediately, hundreds of iron arrows pierced through the air and shot towards the bandits in front. Although there were some powerful people in this group of bandits, most of them were not that strong. In just one round of arrow rain, more than a dozen of the bandits had fallen. 3 black streaks of light shot out from behind the group of bandits at an extremely fast speed, directly hitting the chest of 3 bow-wielding mercenaries. A finger-sized hole immediately appeared on the chest of the 3 mercenaries who were hit by the black streaks of light. They immediately fell to the ground and breathed their last. The black streaks of light shot out at an extremely fast rate, and each time there were 3 streaks of light. In just a short moment, 9 mercenaries had died under the black streaks of light. Seeing the wounds on the mercenaries' chests, a middle-aged man's face suddenly changed. He immediately called out, "Everyone be careful! There's someone with darkness attributed Saint force in the enemy camp." As he spoke, another 3 black streaks of light shot out from the night sky. One of the black streaks of light just happened to be aimed at the middle-aged man who had called out to warn everyone. The middle-aged man's strength was obviously not weak. His face sank, and a silver machete appeared in his right hand in an instant. With a flash of the machete, the middle-aged man had already swung down the machete in his right hand, slashing at the incoming black light. Bang! The black streak of light was completely condensed from energy. When the black streak of light collided with the machete in the middle-aged man's hand, there was a soft explosion. Afterward, the black streak of light silently dispersed. The middle-aged man's body swayed slightly, and his face immediately became stern. He said in a deep voice, "God damn it, there's actually 3 darkness-attributed Saint Force in the enemy camp, and they're all professional archers. In this region, only the Boundless Bandits have such strength." "Vice Captain Liu, what did you say? Are these bandits from the Boundless Bandits?" "Heavens, they're actually from the Boundless Bandits." Chapter 73. As soon as they heard the words Boundless Bandits, all the mercenaries' expressions changed drastically. Boundless Bandits. Gentian's brows furrowed deeply. He was no stranger to the Boundless Bandits. Back then, whether it was in the library of Changyang Prefecture or in the library of Kargath Academy, he had read about the Boundless Bandits. According to the description of the Boundless Bandits in the books, they were extremely powerful and had existed for over 200 years. 200 years ago, when the Boundless Bandits were first born, they were already very powerful and would often appear in the borders of the surrounding kingdoms. At that time, the Boundless Bandits were a nightmare to all the caravans. This was because the Boundless Bandits were very ruthless. They never left any caravans alive after robbing them, and countless merchants and mercenaries had died at their hands. Moreover, the Boundless Bandits would occasionally attack some villages and cities with weak defenses. There was once a time when 2 Grade 3 cities were plundered by the Boundless Bandits, while a Grade 2 city was attacked by the Boundless Bandits. Although they did not manage to capture the Grade 2 city in the end, they still caused a lot of casualties in the Grade 2 city. More than a dozen villages were massacred. At that time, the Boundless Bandits had caused a bloodbath in the surrounding kingdoms, causing caravans to not dare to go to remote places and causing great losses to the various kingdoms. Because of this, the 4 kingdoms, the Kingdom of Jesson, the Kingdom of Blue Moon, the Kingdom of Wind, and the Kingdom of Walla, had gone to war. After sending people to investigate the Boundless Bandits' lair, they had sent troops to encircle and annihilate the Boundless Bandits several times. Unfortunately, the Boundless Bandits' strength was beyond everyone's expectations. Every encirclement and annihilation by the various kingdoms ended in failure and heavy casualties. After a few failed encirclements and annihilations, the various kingdoms actually sent out a top expert at the same time. A total of 4 top experts were gathered to head to the Boundless Bandits' stronghold, the Boundless Mountains. Not long after the top experts of the 4 kingdoms entered the Boundless Mountains, an earth-shattering explosion was heard from the depths of the mountains. The entire Boundless Mountains shook and collapsed. The explosion lasted for a full day and night before it gradually calmed down. During this time, 6 towering peaks of the Boundless Mountains collapsed. When the top experts of the 4 kingdoms came out, the 4 of them did not look very good. They left without saying anything. Within a day, the commanders of the 4 kingdoms who encircled the Boundless Mountains received an order from the king to immediately withdraw their troops and stop the encirclement and annihilation of the Boundless Mountains. Although no one saw with their own eyes what happened after the top experts of the 4 kingdoms entered the depths of the Boundless Mountains, anyone with half a brain could guess what exactly happened. This outcome was unacceptable to all the mercenaries and merchant groups. From then on, the Boundless Bandits' reputation rose to a peak. In the hearts of some mercenaries and merchants, the Boundless Bandits had become the incarnation of the Grim Reaper, deterring the surrounding kingdoms. However, the only thing that made everyone feel fortunate was that after the incident with the top experts of the 4 kingdoms, the Boundless Bandits had become much more low-key. Although there were still many merchants and mercenaries who died in their hands every year, the boundless bandits' appearance was not as frequent as before. They would only appear once a month, and their methods were not as ruthless as before. This gave many merchants a chance to survive. However, the only downside was that the boundless bandits' appearance was uncertain. Therefore, even if some merchant groups wanted to avoid the boundless bandits, they could not figure out the exact time. Damn it, so what if it's the boundless bandits? I'll still chop off their heads. A mercenary glared at the boundless bandits in the distance with eyes full of hatred, not showing the slightest fear. In addition to him, many other mercenaries were also looking at the boundless bandits with eyes full of deep hatred and resentment. The boundless bandits had run amok in this area, robbing countless merchant groups and killing countless merchants and mercenaries over the years. Therefore, many of these mercenaries had relatives and friends who had died in the hands of the boundless bandits. In the hearts of these mercenaries, there was only deep hatred for the boundless bandits, and not the slightest bit of fear. As mercenaries who lived on the edge of the blade all year round, there were also many hot-blooded and unyielding men among them. Not everyone was afraid of death. More than a decade ago, my father died in the hands of the boundless bandits. Today, I'll avenge my father. A mercenary in his 20s stared at the approaching boundless mercenary group with bloodshot eyes. His tone was filled with grief, indignation, and intense hatred. A burly man with a valiant body and a bare upper body had eyes full of strong killing intent. He gritted his teeth and said, "Boundless bandits, you killed my elder brother 5 years ago. Today, even if I have to sacrifice my life, I'll drag you down with me and avenge my elder brother." The black light was still flashing. In just a short while, a few more mercenaries who were shooting arrows fell under this strange black light. The rest of the mercenaries found cover to avoid the black light, which was difficult to guard against, while shooting arrows at the rapidly approaching bandits. Seeing that the bandits were getting closer and closer, many of the mercenaries began to panic. The name Boundless Bandits had a huge impact on them. Many of them were scared out of their wits, and they didn't even have the courage to resist. After all, not everyone was fearless of death. There were still some among them who were timid and afraid of death. Noticing the situation of the mercenaries, a middle-aged man had a look of worry in his eyes. He shouted, "Don't be afraid, everyone. This is just a small unit of the boundless bandits. They are not necessarily stronger than us. As long as we work together, we will definitely be able to defeat them. Otherwise, the only thing that awaits us is death. Brothers, let's give it our all for the sake of survival." Hearing the middle-aged man's words, some of the cowardly mercenaries couldn't help but feel emboldened. These words were extremely motivating to some of them. Only by fighting would there be hope for survival. At this moment, the strong desire to survive made many of the mercenaries abandon the fear in their hearts and decide to fight to the death. The mercenaries tried their best to dodge the black light that was shooting at them from afar, while shooting at the bandits in front of them with their bows and arrows. After nearly 100 people fell, the boundless bandits finally arrived in front of a group of mercenaries. At this time, the bows in the mercenaries' hands had already lost their effectiveness. All of the mercenaries abandoned their bows and arrows and summoned their holy weapons to fight the boundless bandits. Ah! Battle cries shook the sky from the crowd. The collision of weapons was densely packed, and miserable shrieks were constantly heard. Behind the bandits, in the darkness that couldn't be seen with the naked eye, black light constantly streaked through the air. Every time, it would accurately hit a mercenary. In just a short period of time, dozens of mercenaries had already died to this black light. Leader and the others are being held back by the enemy experts. Carlo, Gusung, Mir, the 3 of you come with me. We must hold back the 3 people hiding in the dark and shooting arrows. In the chaotic battlefield, a mercenary in armor shouted. As soon as he finished speaking, he leaped into the air and rushed in the direction of the black light, just as the middle-aged man in armor left. Another 3 mercenaries followed closely behind him and leaped into the air. Using the heads of the bandits as leverage, they rushed in the direction of the black light. Facing the 4 mercenaries who had leaped over their heads, the hundreds of bandits were actually helpless. Although the boundless bandit group's ferocious reputation had intimidated several kingdoms in the vicinity, this time only a small group of bandits had come. Moreover, they weren't elites. The strongest among them had been blocked by the dozen or so experts who had rushed over earlier. At this moment, there was simply no one who could stop these from mercenaries who were not weak. 3 black lights, once again, shot towards the 4 mercenaries from the darkness in the distance. Clearly, the 3 people with darkness attribute Saint Force hiding in the distance had discovered the intentions of the 4 mercenaries. Just as the 3 black streaks shot out, another 3 black streaks appeared. A total of 6 streaks of black streaks lined up in 2 rows and shot towards the 4 mercenaries at an extremely fast speed without making a sound. The strength of these 4 mercenaries wasn't weak. They were far stronger than the mercenaries on guard duty. A weapon appeared in their hands at the same time, and they swung their weapons at the incoming black light. When the 2 collided, the black light shattered and dissipated. The speed of the 4 mercenaries was only a little slower, and they continued to rush in the direction of the black light. The 4 of them were very clear that if they didn't get rid of the 3 people hiding in the dark, it would bring a huge loss to their camp. Although the 3 mercenary groups had several hundred people in total, they could only be regarded as a low-level mercenary group in the mercenary world of the Tian-Yuan continent. Most of the mercenaries in the groups were still at the level of saints and great saints. There were even very few people who had reached the level of saint masters. Only the captains and vice-captains possessed the strength of great saint masters. However, the 3 captains and vice-captains had already been occupied by the bandits in the enemy camp, so they were unable to deal with the 3 archers. As expected, when the 4 experts disappeared from everyone's sight, the black lights no longer shot over. It did not matter if the 4 experts were able to keep the 3 archers busy or not. They had at least bought some precious time for the mercenaries. After all, the black lights were silent and difficult to detect under the cover of the night. They were extremely fast as well, so some of the weaker mercenaries were unable to dodge them at all. Without any potential danger, the mercenaries no longer needed to be on guard against the black lights that could shoot at them at any time. They all unleashed their full battle prowess, clashing with the bandits in an intense battle. At that moment, all the mercenaries cast aside their fear of the bandits. For the sake of survival, all of them did their best to kill the bandits, all for the sake of obtaining the final victory. Deafening cries filled the battlefield as the sounds of weapons colliding constantly rang out. Blood quickly dyed the ground red from the splattering blood. In just a short while of battle, over a dozen people from both sides had already collapsed. Jianqin had now joined the battle as well. Even though he was only a saint, his battle prowess would definitely shock everyone. Jianqin used profound footwork as he dodged the attacks from all directions. A silver sword that was only 2 fingers wide and 1 meter long constantly stabbed out with lightning-like speed. His sword stabbed out so quickly that only a tiny flash of silver could be seen. It was impossible to see the sword with the naked eye. Chapter 74. Jianqin was dealing with a group of enemies on his own. The constant, blood-curdling screams and the bloody scene in front of him had already become a common sight to him. It didn't leave any impression on him at all. Jianqin's sword continued to stab out as the boundless bandits fell one by one. In front of Jianqin's lightning-fast swordsmanship, the bandits who were on the same level as Jianqin simply couldn't last more than 3 moves. There were even quite a few who were directly stabbed in the throat by Jianqin. Although Jianqin's strength could only be considered as the weakest amongst the mercenaries, but in terms of the number of bandits he had killed, no one could compare to him. In just a few breaths of time, more than a dozen bandits had fallen under Jianqin's sword. Jianqin's silver-white light wind sword was already stained red with blood. Even so, Jianshin's coarse clothes were still clean and neat. There wasn't a single drop of blood on them, unlike the other mercenaries who were covered in blood. Unknowingly, Jianshin had already infiltrated deep into the bandit camp. Right now, within a 20-meter radius of him, there were only bandits from the Boundless Bandits. There wasn't a single mercenary present, and the mercenaries were all grouped up in groups of 3 to 5 to fight against the bandits. Kill! 3 bandits who were closest to Jianshin let out a battle cry as they rushed towards Jianshin. Raising their weapons, they slashed towards Jianshin's head. Jianshin quickly took a step forward. His movements were like that of a ghost as he arrived in front of one of the bandits. At the same time, the light wind sword in his hand became a red ray of light as it pierced towards the bandit's throat. Jianshin was already proficient in fast swordsmanship, so the speed of his sword was even faster. The bandit didn't even have time to react. All he could see was a red ray of light flashing past his throat. After that, he felt a slight numbness in his throat. It was as if something was blocking his throat, making it difficult for him to breathe. Following that, fresh red blood began to flow from his neck. The bandit didn't even have the chance to make a sound as his body slowly fell backwards. At the last moment, the bandit didn't even understand how he died. Perhaps he didn't even know that his throat had been pierced by Jianshin's lightning-fast sword. This was because Jianshin's swordsmanship was so fast that the bandit didn't even have time to react. Moreover, when the thin sword pierced through his throat, the bandit didn't feel any pain at all. After the light wind sword pierced through the bandit's throat, Jianshin's movements didn't slow down at all. At this time, the other 2 bandits were already in front of him, their weapons already slashing towards his body. Facing the attacks of the 2 bandits, Jianshin's expression didn't reveal the slightest trace of panic. His face was as calm as water as he immediately pulled out the light wind sword from the bandit's throat. With a mysterious footwork, his body moved 2 meters to the side like a ghost, dodging the attacks of the 2 bandits. At the same time, the blood-stained light wind sword in his hand pierced towards the throat of one of the bandits at a speed that the naked eye couldn't follow. The light wind sword didn't meet with any resistance and easily avoided the reaction of the bandit, stabbing deep into his throat. Just as the light wind sword was about to pierce the throat of the bandit, Jianshin immediately pulled it out and stabbed towards the 3rd bandit. Every strike of Jianshin's sword was extremely fast, to the point that the naked eye couldn't follow it. Almost no one in the same realm as him would be able to dodge his sword. As for the 3rd bandit, he couldn't even see the shadow of the sword before the light wind sword had already pierced through his throat. To Jianshin, killing people was already a common occurrence. The bloody scene in front of him was already a common occurrence, so he didn't even bat an eyelid. After dealing with the bandits, Jianshin didn't stop and continued to stab the bandits around him with his light wind sword. The battle was very fierce. At this critical moment that concerned their lives, no one could stay out of it. Even the coachmen who had not reached the Saint Realm had gathered in groups of 3 to 5. They gathered their strength and cooperated with some mercenaries to attack the bandits, who were alone. The intense battle caused the number of people on both sides to decrease rapidly. Whether it was the bandits or the mercenaries, they all suffered extremely heavy casualties. Aside from Jianshin, who still maintained his clean clothes, everyone else was covered in blood. There were even a few people who were completely bathed in blood. They seemed like people made of blood, and their bodies were covered in wounds of various sizes. Although the bandits outnumbered the mercenaries by a lot, their individual strength and teamwork were far inferior to the mercenaries. As the 2 sides fought, the number of people who died was much higher than the number of mercenaries. Even so, the number of people on both sides could barely maintain a balance. Jianshin continued to weave through the bandits, calmly dodging the attacks coming from all directions. The light wind sword in his hand was completely stained with blood, and with every stab, it would either directly hit the heart of a bandit, killing them, or leave a deep wound on their body. The surrounding bandits couldn't do anything to Jianshin. Not only were they unable to see Jianshin's sword, they couldn't even hit him with their weapons. This was because there were many times when their weapons were about to hit Jianshin. Jianshin would always be able to dodge by a hair's breadth. As a result, the bandits couldn't even touch Jianshin's clothes. Instead, more and more people fell to Jianshin's sword. More and more bandits died at Jianshin's hands. Gradually, the surrounding bandits began to realize how powerful Jianshin was and began to deliberately distance themselves from him. After all, in a situation where they were no match for him, no one was willing to throw away their lives for nothing. "Sire, you have good skills. Let me have a go at you." At this time, a deep voice entered Jianshin's ears. Just as the voice fell, a light green light shot towards Jianshin at an extremely fast speed. Feeling the speed of the light green light and the powerful energy it emitted, Jianshin's expression suddenly changed. Just from this attack, he could tell that this person was very strong. So strong that even with his current strength, he didn't dare to face this person head-on. Otherwise, he was afraid that this person's attack would be enough to injure him. This light green light was very fast. In an instant, it had arrived in front of Jianshin. At the same time, Jianshin's expression became very dignified. He immediately controlled his body and tried his best to dodge to the side. The light green light almost brushed past Jianshin's shoulder and fiercely bombarded the ground. With a loud boom, a deep hole was created in the ground. Jianshin's figure quickly retreated and immediately pulled away from the opponent. In the blink of an eye, he had retreated 5 zhang away. When he stopped, Jianshin raised his head and looked. Although it was now dark, with the help of the stubbornly burning bonfire in the distance and his extraordinary eyesight, he could still clearly see the person in front of him. He saw that the person was a middle-aged man of about 30 or 40 years old. The middle-aged man had an average build and didn't look very strong. His appearance was also very ordinary. Coupled with the cloth clothes he was wearing, he looked like a very ordinary person. If you removed the large glaive in his right hand that was emitting a faint green light, then this middle-aged man in front of him looked like a completely ordinary person. There was nothing about him that could attract attention. Just as Jianshin was sizing up this middle-aged man, the middle-aged man's calm gaze was also sizing up Jianshin. At the same time, the middle-aged man said, "Your strength is very good. Your opponent should be me." The middle-aged man's voice was very calm. His gaze was fixed on Jianshin as if there was only Jianshin in his eyes. He showed an indifferent expression to the sounds of killing all around him. Jianshin looked around and observed the surroundings. This middle-aged man clearly had quite a high status among the bandits. Ever since he appeared, all the bandits within a certain range of Jianshin all avoided him. Even though there were quite a few bandits around Jianshin, when they saw the middle-aged man facing off against Jianshin, none of them dared to approach him. They all went to find other mercenaries to fight. Jianshin's face became stern. He knew that this battle was definitely the first battle of life and death since he had come to this world. Even though he had gone through hundreds of battles and was confident that he was invincible among those of the same level, Jianshin did not have much confidence in killing this middle-aged man. Just from the strength of the middle-aged man's attack, Jianshin could tell that the middle-aged man's strength far exceeded his own. At the same time, the middle-aged man also possessed wind-attributed Saint Force. In terms of speed, he was no slower than Jianshin. The middle-aged man stared at Jianshin as he slowly picked up the large glaive that was slightly taller than him. A faint azure light revolved around the glaive as strands of wind revolved around the middle-aged man's body. Noticing the middle-aged man's movements, Jianshin's mind was on high alert as well. Even though he had mastered the profound footwork, he did not dare to be careless against an opponent who was much stronger than him. Moreover, the opponent had Saint Force of the Wind attribute and specialized in speed. Suddenly, the middle-aged man let out an explosive roar as he rushed towards Jianshin. The middle-aged man's speed was extremely fast and arrived in front of Jianshin in the blink of an eye. His glaive glowed with a brilliant azure light as it slashed towards Genshin's neck at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye. Genshin's head was slightly tilted to the side as the glaive brushed past his head. After the glaive passed, a few strands of black hair slowly fell to the ground. At the same time that his head was tilted to the side, Genshin's body suddenly crouched as he took a large step forward. His body quickly leaned forward as he closed the distance between him and the middle-aged man. The light-wind sword in his hand formed a blood-red ray of light as it pierced towards the middle-aged man's heart with lightning speed. Facing a middle-aged man who was much stronger than him, Genshin had already used all of his strength in this attack. He didn't hold back in the slightest. The speed of the sword was so fast that it had almost reached the limit of what Genshin was capable of. In an instant, the tip of the light wind sword had already reached the middle-aged man's chest. At the tip of the sword, Genshin's sword chi had already pierced through the man's body. Seeing the tip of the light wind sword about to reach his chest, the middle-aged man's face changed greatly as his eyes were filled with disbelief. However, the middle-aged man's reaction was also very quick. At this critical moment, a large amount of Saint Force was released from his body and formed a powerful shockwave that collided with the light wind sword that was about to reach his chest. At the same time, a portion of the Saint Force formed a seemingly weak but extremely sturdy barrier around his body. Chapter 75. Like a hot knife through butter, the light wind sword pierced through the middle-aged man's Saint Force. Even so, the speed of the light wind sword was a bit slower than before. When the light wind sword pierced through the middle-aged man's Saint Force barrier, the light wind sword's tip paused for a moment before breaking through the barrier and continuing towards the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's 2 layers of defense only lasted for less than a breath of time before they were broken. Even so, it was enough to buy him enough time. By the time the light wind sword broke through the 2 layers of defense, the middle-aged man had already retreated a few meters away with the help of his wind-attributed Saint Force. The middle-aged man stood several meters away as he stared at Genshin, who had already sheathed his sword. His face became serious as he muttered, "What a fast speed!" Genshin calmly stared at the middle-aged man without saying a word. In his heart, he felt that it was a pity. That sword strike just now was already the limit of his strength. Moreover, it was also the fastest speed he could achieve. If his full-strength attack was dodged by the middle-aged man, then it would be very difficult for him to kill the middle-aged man. After all, the middle-aged man's strength was much higher than his own. Moreover, he had the Saint Force of the wind element and was an expert in speed. It could be said that Genshin had already lost the upper hand against the middle-aged man. No matter how exquisite his swordsmanship was, it would all be useless if it was not so fast that the opponent could not react to it. Moreover, Genshin did not dare to clash with the middle-aged man in a head-on battle when the difference in strength was so great. Your strength should have reached the level of a Saint Master, right? Genshin calmly stared at the middle-aged man and asked. The middle-aged man didn't hide anything and said, "Correct. My strength is indeed at the intermediate Saint Master level." The middle-aged man paused for a moment as he stared at Genshin with a strange light in his eyes and asked, "You aren't very strong and your Saint Force isn't of the wind element. But your sword strike just now was so fast that even I almost couldn't dodge it. I don't know how you managed to achieve such speed." The middle-aged man's voice was filled with curiosity. Right now, he really did want to know the answer to this question. As someone who possessed wind-attributed Saint Force, he would not care if someone surpassed him in any other aspect. However, if someone surpassed him in speed, it would be very difficult for him to just let it go, especially when the person who surpassed him in speed was weaker than him and did not possess wind-attributed Saint Force. The middle-aged man could not help but feel curious. "Sorry, I can't answer that question." Genshin's voice was very calm. Hearing this, the middle-aged man's eyes turned cold, and he said coldly, "If you tell me what method you used to increase your speed, I can let you go today. Otherwise, "Humph! Do you really think that you are a match for me with that little bit of speed? Whether I'm your opponent or not, you're welcome to try." Facing the middle-aged man's threat, Genshin wasn't afraid at all. Instead, he exuded a strong fighting spirit. In his hand, the light wind sword was already dyed red with blood and emitted a hazy sword aura. The middle-aged man stared at Genshin with a strange light in his eyes. In his heart, he still had some misgivings about Genshin's sword strike, because the speed of Genshin's sword was so fast that even he couldn't match it. Even though he had the wind element, which gave him an innate advantage in terms of speed, he still couldn't unleash an attack as fast as Genshin's. In order to dodge that sword strike, he had already used all of his strength. If he had been just a step slower, he didn't doubt that his heart would have been pierced through. Because of this, the middle-aged man was now somewhat afraid of Genshin. Moreover, the middle-aged man looked at Genshin's spiritual energy cloak and couldn't tell how many times Genshin could unleash such a fast attack. If Genshin could unleash an endless stream of attacks at the same speed, then the middle-aged man would have a hard time dealing with it. Seeing that the middle-aged man wasn't attacking, Genshin was happy to be at ease. Just like that, he faced off against the middle-aged man. Genshin was extremely clear that it was basically impossible for him to kill the middle-aged man when the middle-aged man wasn't any slower than him. Right now, he could only keep the middle-aged man busy so that he wouldn't kill the weaker mercenaries. Once the experts of the mercenary group returned, he would directly throw the middle-aged man to them to deal with. The battle in the field didn't stop because of Genshin and the middle-aged man's standoff. The sounds of killing continued, and more corpses of mercenaries and bandits fell to the ground. The ground was completely dyed red with blood, and there were even small puddles of blood on the uneven ground. The bandits were still fighting with all their might. Those who were able to survive until the end were either smart or had outstanding strength. Currently, the number of mercenaries and bandits was still at a relatively balanced stage. After the middle-aged man and Genshin's standoff, the middle-aged man finally made his move again. The large glaive in his hand emitted a light green light, and in the darkness of the night it was like a bright light. Holding the 2-meter-long glaive, the middle-aged man once again rushed towards Genshin. Seeing the middle-aged man rushing towards him, Genshin's eyes flashed with a sharp light. His right hand gripped the light wind sword even tighter as he took the initiative to meet the middle-aged man head-on. The middle-aged man raised his faintly glowing glaive and directly swung it down at Genshin's head. He moved extremely quickly. Facing the attack of a mid-level Saint Master, Genshin didn't plan to meet it head-on. Instead, he nimbly dodged the attack and counterattacked. But just as Genshin's sword was about to strike out, the middle-aged man's glaive suddenly changed direction in midair. With a whistling sound, the glaive flew towards Genshin's light wind sword. Genshin's face slightly changed as he immediately pulled back his light wind sword. From the beginning to the end, he didn't want to meet the glaive head-on. Genshin's light wind sword was his life-bound saint weapon. His entire life was tied to this seemingly weak light wind sword. If the light wind sword was damaged, then not only would Genshin lose all of his martial arts, his life would also be in danger. In the Tianyuan continent, there were many cases where the owner of a saint weapon had died because of it. However, even though a saint weapon was condensed from saint chi, once it was summoned out of the body, it would become incomparably hard. Moreover, it would also become stronger as the owner's strength increased. Unless the difference in strength was too great, then a saint weapon would not be easily damaged. The middle-aged man's current strength was already at the intermediate Saint Master level, which was 2 whole levels higher than Genshin. Although Genshin's light wind sword and the glaive head-on would not necessarily cause too much damage to the light wind sword, the powerful recoil would still be too much for Genshin to bear. Therefore, no matter what, Genshin would not dare to meet the middle-aged man head-on. After all, the only one who would suffer would be himself. Once again dodging the middle-aged man's attack, the middle-aged man's defense revealed a small opening. Chen's eyes flashed as he took advantage of this rare opportunity. Like a ghost, Jianchen silently appeared behind the middle-aged man. The light wind sword in his hand emitted a sharp sword chi that transformed into a blood-red light as it pierced towards the middle-aged man's back. The long sword pierced through the air, creating a sharp sound as if the air itself was being sliced apart. The sword's speed was even faster than before, reaching the middle-aged man's back in an instant. But before the tip of the sword could make contact with the middle-aged man's back, the sword chi emitted from the tip of the sword had already pierced through the middle-aged man's back, piercing through his skin. Feeling the sharp pain from his back, the middle-aged man's expression changed greatly, but he didn't show any signs of panic. He was already prepared for Jianchen's extremely fast attack. Immediately, a powerful Saint Chi surged out from his body and condensed into an energy barrier on his back to block the sword. At the same time, the middle-aged man's body began to glow with a light green light. At this moment, he had already raised his speed to the limit, leaving behind a series of afterimages. Just as Jianchen's light wind sword was about to pierce his back, the middle-aged man had already moved half a meter to the side, escaping from the attack range of the light wind sword. The middle-aged man guessed that for Jianchen to be able to pierce out with such speed, he must have used all of his strength. At this moment, his defense was already at its lowest, so the middle-aged man took advantage of this rare opportunity. After dodging Jianchen's attack, he immediately raised his glaive up high. The glaive in his hand emitted a light green glow that gradually turned into a dazzling lamp under the night sky. The glaive left behind a beautiful green glow in the air as it slashed towards Jianchen at an extremely fast speed. This glaive contained the full strength of the middle-aged man's attack. After exchanging blows with Jianchen several times, the middle-aged man had already experienced how difficult it was to deal with Jianchen. With Jianchen's rich battle experience, the middle-aged man didn't leave any openings for him to take advantage of. Whether it was attacking or dodging, the middle-aged man's moves were all flawless, leaving no openings for the middle-aged man to take advantage of. But this time, the middle-aged man had borrowed Jianchen's full strength attack to deal a heavy blow to Jianchen. Because of this, the middle-aged man didn't hold back at all. The glaive cut through the air at an extremely fast speed. If it had been someone weaker, they wouldn't even have had the time to react. Hua! With a boom, the glaive that was enveloped in a layer of azure light chopped down on Jianchen's head without any obstruction. It passed through his body and landed heavily on the ground without slowing down at all. With a boom, the glaive that contained the middle-aged man's full strength sank deeply into the ground. The powerful saint force on the glaive created a meter-wide crater in the surrounding soil. As dust flew into the air, Jianchen's figure was directly swallowed up. However, the middle-aged man did not show any joy at all. Instead, he became extremely stern. An afterimage. The middle-aged man exclaimed in his heart. However, just as this thought appeared in his mind, a strong sense of crisis spread throughout the middle-aged man's heart. The middle-aged man did not hesitate at all. His body leaned to the side with all his strength as if it was a conditioned reflex. At the same time, he immediately pulled out the large glaive in his hand from the ground and slashed behind him without looking. Ding! With a crisp sound, the middle-aged man's large glaive collided with a thin, long sword covered in blood that had suddenly appeared and clashed with it. Chapter 76. Jianchen retreated 20 meters before stopping. Now that he was no longer able to maintain his calm, his originally calm face had turned pale. After all, the difference in strength between him and the middle-aged man was simply too great. He could only rely on his movement skills to contend with the middle-aged man. When he had clashed with the middle-aged man's saint weapon, Jianchen had suffered quite a bit. Although the saint weapon was not damaged, the middle-aged man's saint chi was several times stronger than Jianchen's through the light wind sword. Jianchen's internal organs had been shaken and he had suffered some minor injuries. The middle-aged man steadied himself and looked at Jianchen with a serious expression. Facing this person who had almost caused him to suffer 3 times in a row, the middle-aged man did not dare to underestimate him. Although the latter's strength was weak in the eyes of the middle-aged man, his speed was not any slower than his own, and his attacks were extremely fast. The middle-aged man's threat was even greater than his own opponent's. However, when the middle-aged man saw Genshin's condition, he seemed to have understood something. He could not help but laugh and say in a deep voice, "Brat, I admit that your speed is very fast, but in the end, your strength is still too weak." As soon as he finished speaking, the middle-aged man did not give Genshin any time to catch his breath and once again swung his 2-meter-long glaive at Genshin. Because of the light wind sword and the middle-aged man's glaive, Genshin had suffered some minor injuries. Although these injuries would not have been much of a hindrance to Genshin under normal circumstances, in this battle against a middle-aged man who was 2 levels higher than him and had already reached the intermediate Saint Master level, these injuries were extremely fatal. After all, Genshin could only rely on his profound movement skills to contend with the middle-aged man when he was in his peak condition. Now that he was injured, Genshin could not maintain his speed and was gradually becoming more and more difficult to dodge. After exchanging a few blows with Genshin, the middle-aged man seemed to have understood that Genshin's threat to him had decreased by a lot. Thus, he decided to lower his guard against Genshin and bring out all of his strength. He did not hold back at all as he attacked Genshin with a speed that was several times faster than before. As the middle-aged man's attack speed increased, it became more and more difficult for Genshin to dodge. If Genshin was in his peak condition, not only would he be able to dodge the middle-aged man's attacks, he would also be able to find the time to counterattack. However, as the middle-aged man's speed increased, every time Genshin tried to dodge the middle-aged man's attacks, it would become more and more dangerous. The middle-aged man's attack speed was extremely fast. In just a few breaths of time, he had already launched a few dozen attacks. Now that Genshin had lost the ability to counterattack, his clothes were already filled with cracks. Traces of blood dyed the edges of the cracks red. From the small traces of blood, it could be seen that the wounds on Genshin's body were not deep. A light cyan light flashed in the dark night. The middle-aged man's glaive seemed to be wrapped in a gust of wind as it cut through the night sky at an extremely fast speed towards Genshin. Although Genshin had already tried his best to dodge the glaive, he was still unable to completely dodge it due to his greatly reduced speed. The glaive left a deep wound on Genshin's chest that was so deep that his bones could be seen. The glaive went through his entire chest, and the blood gushed out and dyed Genshin's clothes red in a moment. The middle-aged man smiled ferociously and did not stop at all. Taking advantage of the fact that Genshin had not pulled away from him, he immediately took a step forward to close the distance between him and Genshin. His right foot flashed with a light cyan light as he ruthlessly kicked Genshin's chest with lightning speed. Bam! Genshin's body was kicked far away by the middle-aged man like a cannonball. While his body was still in the air, a mouthful of blood spurted out from Genshin's mouth. His body flew for more than 20 meters, knocking away several bandits along the way before he fell to the ground in a sorry state. Immediately after, another mouthful of blood spurted out from Genshin's mouth. His face had already become deathly pale. With a flash of cyan light, the middle-aged man had already crossed over 20 meters and appeared before Genshin. He sneered at him and said, "I'll give you one last chance. If you tell me how you can display a speed that's no slower than mine with your puny strength, I'll spare your life today. Otherwise, die." The middle-aged man's eyes flickered with a scorching light. He was extremely tempted by how Genshin could display a speed that was no slower than his with his puny strength. He desperately wanted to know how to use a secret technique like that. To him, who cultivated wind-attributed Saint Force, speed was extremely important. Once he grasped the secret technique, the middle-aged man could not imagine just how fast he would be. However, he was certain that his strength would increase drastically. At that time, his status in the Boundless Bandits would increase drastically. The middle-aged man felt his blood boil as soon as he thought up to there. He was extremely excited, and even his face became rather excited. Jianchen wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and slowly stood up. He stared coldly at the excited middle-aged man. The man could not help but sneer. "I'm afraid you don't have the ability." Even though he was quite injured, Jianchen did not show any fear towards the middle-aged man who was more powerful than him. As he said that, Jianchen made some slight adjustments to his body. He was completely relaxed now, as if he was completely defenseless. His right hand that gripped his sword loosened slightly as well. He seemed completely defenseless right now, not like he was in the middle of a battle at all. Jianchen's words caused the middle-aged man's face to darken. He coldly snorted and said, "Brat, with your current strength, you don't have the qualifications to boast like that. Since you don't want to speak, then I'll have to make you suffer." As soon as he finished speaking, the middle-aged man waved his large glaive towards Jianchen's right shoulder. Facing the middle-aged man's glaive, Jianchen did not make any movements to dodge. Instead, he raised his sword and met the glaive head-on. Although the speed of the glaive was incomparably fast, it gave people a feeling that it was as light as a feather. It was completely different from the ferocious killing intent from before. When the light wind sword and the glaive collided, there wasn't a single sound. The two weapons made contact without a single sound. The seemingly soft light wind sword was like a maggot attached to a bone as it stuck tightly to the glaive. Using a very ingenious method, it caused the glaive to deviate from its original path of attack. It circled around in the air a few times, completely removing the terrifying force from the glaive. Then, it led the glaive to the side, causing the glaive to land on the ground next to it. The middle-aged man's face slightly changed as he looked at Jianchen with a bit of surprise. This was because just a moment ago he had actually lost control of his glaive. If such a strange thing happened to an opponent who was stronger than him, then it wouldn't be a big deal. But this time his opponent was much weaker than him. This was something that the middle-aged man could not accept. What kind of battle skill is that? The middle-aged man asked in surprise. Tai Chi sword technique. Jianchen replied. He wasn't proficient in Tai Chi sword technique, but he had interacted with the experts of the Wu-Dang sect many times in his previous life. This allowed him to gradually understand the principles behind Tai Chi sword technique. At this moment, his strength was not as good as the middle-aged man's, and he was already at the end of his rope. Jianchen had no choice but to use the Tai Chi sword technique that he wasn't proficient in to defend himself. The Tai Chi sword technique was about using softness to overcome hardness, using stillness to overcome the strong, and it also contained the ability to move 1,000 kilograms with little effort. It was indeed extremely helpful to Jianchen's current predicament. However, the only flaw was that Jianchen only had a superficial understanding of the Tai Chi sword technique. He was not proficient in it. After all, he was skilled with the sword, but even so, it was enough for Jianchen to last a while against the middle-aged man. Hearing this, the middle-aged man frowned in thought. He then shook his head slightly and murmured, "Tai Chi sword technique? I've never heard of it." Afterwards, the middle-aged man looked at Jianchen again. His eyes flickered with an indescribable light as he chuckled coldly. "Kid, I never thought that you would know so many battle skills even though you're not strong. Looks like it would be a pity to kill you with a single glaive. I should capture you and bring you back. I'm sure this would be a great contribution." With that, the middle-aged man attacked again. The glaive in his hand was filled with powerful saint force as it attacked Jianchen. He had already made up his mind to capture Jianchen today, no matter what. The middle-aged man did not pay much attention to the Tai Chi sword technique that could divert his attacks. What really interested him was Jianchen's secret technique of using speed. Afterwards, Jianchen barely managed to contend with the middle-aged man with the Tai Chi sword technique that he was not very familiar with. With the mysteries of the Tai Chi sword technique, Jianqin was able to nullify all of the middle-aged man's attacks. At the same time, the middle-aged man was unable to control his glaive due to the guidance of the Tai Chi sword technique. Before Jianqin's Tai Chi sword technique, the middle-aged man's great strength seemed to be non-existent. However, Jianqin was not as relaxed as he seemed on the surface. Although the Tai Chi sword technique allowed him to overcome hardness with gentleness, he needed to use his full strength to nullify the terrifying force of the glaive as he had just become a saint. As a result, Jianqin seemed to be relaxed when blocking the middle-aged man's attacks, but it was actually extremely difficult. However, Jianqin could only use the Tai Chi sword technique to temporarily protect himself. He could not fight back at all. He could only block without any chance of winning. If it were not for the fact that the middle-aged man had forced him into a corner, Jianqin would never have used the Tai Chi sword technique that he was not very familiar with. After clashing with Jianqin a few times, a sliver of anger gradually appeared on the middle-aged man's face. Not only would his attacks be nullified by someone who was much weaker than him in a wondrous manner, he would even lose control over his weapon. This was definitely a humiliation to the middle-aged man. Bastard, I don't believe that I can't do anything to you today. The middle-aged man flew into a rage out of humiliation. He finally could not help but curse. As he cursed, his attacks became even more ferocious. Chapter 77. The middle-aged man's frenzied attacks also put a lot of pressure on Jianqin. After all, Jianqin had to use his full strength to block the middle-aged man's attacks. It could be said that every time Jianqin blocked the middle-aged man's attacks, he would use up a lot of his saint force. Jianqin's previous battle with the middle-aged man had already used up more than half of his saint force. Now that he was heavily injured, Jianqin could only hold on for a short while before he started to feel a little weak. Blocking the middle-aged man's attacks was becoming more and more difficult. Jianqin had just entered the saint realm, but he was able to contend with the middle-aged man for so long. This wasn't just because of his high level of swordsmanship, but also because of his battle experience. If it was another person with the same level of strength as Jianqin, it would be hard to say if they would be able to survive after 10 exchanges with a middle-aged man. After all, the difference in strength between a saint and a saint master was just too great. In between, there was a gap of 2 whole stages. The light green light once again streaked across the sky. When the light wind sword in Jianqin's hand came into contact with the large glaive, it was no longer possible for him to block it. The light wind sword was blocked by the large glaive, and under the pressure of the large glaive, the light wind sword was no longer under Jianqin's control. In the end, the light wind sword ruthlessly smashed into Jianqin's chest. Jianqin's body was directly sent flying, and after flying for more than 10 meters, he finally landed on the ground. A mouthful of blood uncontrollably rushed up from his throat and sprayed out from his mouth, filling the air with a bloody mist. "Brat, let's see if you still have the ability to escape from my grasp. Obediently return with me." The middle-aged man coldly laughed. Without giving Jianqin any time to catch his breath, his figure flickered, and in the blink of an eye he appeared in front of Jianqin. He extended his large hands towards Jianqin's neck. Coldly looking at the middle-aged man's rapidly approaching hands, Jianqin's eyes flashed with a sharp light. However, he sighed inwardly. "AI, looks like I can only use my last move." The last move was Jianqin's ultimate life-saving move. At the same time, it was also his only life-saving move in the Tianyuan continent, sword manipulation. Sword manipulation was a technique that Jianqin had only comprehended after his battle with Duge Qiubai in his previous life. He had broken through right before his death. However, just when Jianqin was about to use his ultimate move to deal with the predicament before him, a huge, fiery red sword suddenly swept through the air. It directly slashed towards the middle-aged man's hand that was reaching towards Jianqin. glancing at the huge, fiery red sword from the corner of his eye. A sliver of disdain appeared in the middle-aged man's eyes. He gently snorted, and his hand that was reaching towards Jianshin immediately stopped. Afterward, a faint azure light erupted from his hand, directly enveloping the middle-aged man's hand. Afterward, the middle-aged man's hand that was enveloped by azure wind-attributed Saint Force directly swung towards the incoming sword. In the end, he caught the sword firmly in his hand. Using this opportunity, Jianshin forcefully endured his heavy injuries and crawled up from the ground. He instinctively looked at the person who had saved him. Just when he was about to thank him, his eyes suddenly narrowed. The owner of the sword was a young man who seemed to be in his 20s. The young man's appearance was ordinary, the type that would stand out in a crowd. However, Jianshin was familiar with this young man. He was the mercenary that he had gotten along very well with along the way, Mu Yun. The middle-aged man sneered as he looked at Mu Yun, who held the sword. He sneered, "You overestimate yourself." A strange smile appeared on Mu Yun's face when he heard the middle-aged man's words. He gently chuckled. "You're only a mid-saint master. You're not much stronger than me. Yet you dare to boast like that." As soon as he finished speaking, Mu Yun's huge, fiery red sword shone brightly. The fiery red light emitted a scorching heat. It was extremely obvious in the pitch-black night, dispersing quite a bit of the surrounding darkness. As the fiery red light grew brighter and brighter, the temperature continued to rise. In just a few breaths of time, the huge, fiery red sword was wrapped in a dazzling, fiery red light. The light constantly pulsed, making it look like a sea of flames. The middle-aged man could not help but frown when he sensed the rapidly increasing temperature and the surging Saint Force on the sword. He then suddenly released the sword in his hand and viciously slapped the sword. Bang! Struck by the middle-aged man's powerful palm strike, Mu Yun's fiery greatsword was slapped to the side. However, Mu Yun had a certain amount of combat experience. Borrowing the strength of the greatsword, he actually turned around and made a circle in the air with the greatsword before slashing at the middle-aged man again. "Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish." The middle-aged man snorted coldly. The large glaive in his hand flashed with a light green light. Then he waved the glaive. Under the cover of a breeze, the glaive met the fiery, red, great sword at an extremely fast speed. Clang! Mu Yun's sword and the glaive collided, producing a loud clang. The two saint weapons separated as soon as they came into contact. Mu Yun staggered back more than 10 steps. On the other hand, the middle-aged man's feet seemed to have taken root in the ground. He stood there as steady as a mountain, not even swaying in the slightest. It was obvious who was stronger and who was weaker with a single glance. Jianshin, who was standing on the side, saw this scene and understood. Mu Yun's strength was slightly weaker than the middle-aged man, but he was definitely stronger than him. According to his estimation, Mu Yun's strength should be between the intermediate and advanced great saint. Even so, he was still not a match for the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's wind-attributed Saint Force specialized in speed. In terms of attack power, it was far inferior to Mu Yun's fire-attributed Saint Force. After all, the fire-attributed Saint Force was recognized as the most powerful attack power apart from the two rarer attributes of light and darkness. However, the middle-aged man could completely suppress Mu Yun in a head-on battle with his wind-attributed Saint Force. If the middle-aged man used his wind-attributed Saint Force to fight Mu Yun with his speed, Jianshin was certain that Mu Yun would not be able to last long in the middle-aged man's hands. If he and Mu Yun worked together to fight the middle-aged man, Jianshin was confident that the two of them would be able to hold the middle-aged man back. Unfortunately, Jianshin had been heavily injured by the middle-aged man several times. He was now heavily injured. His organs had all been severely damaged. In his current state, even standing there was an extremely difficult task for him, let alone helping out. Forcing Mu Yun to retreat with one strike, the middle-aged man's eyes flashed with murderous intent. without giving Mu Yun time to adjust the green light on his glaive sword. His body left behind an illusory shadow as he appeared in front of Mu Yun in the blink of an eye. He slashed at Mu Yun's head with his glaive at an extremely fast speed. The middle-aged man did not hold back at all against Mu Yun. He directly tried to kill him as soon as he arrived. After all, there was nothing on Mu Yun that could interest him. Mu Yun's expression turned solemn. He suddenly let out a roar, and the great sword in his hand instantly turned red. An even hotter temperature radiated from the great sword. At the same time, a raging flame suddenly appeared and enveloped the great sword completely. Mu Yun then swung the great sword to meet the oncoming glaive head-on. Just as Mu Yun's giant sword was swung out, it suddenly split into 3 fire snakes. 2 of them carried monstrous flames to meet the glaive, while the last fire snake rushed towards the middle-aged man's face. Boom! The glaive and the 2 fire snakes collided, and suddenly a loud sound rang out. The 2 fire snakes that were burning with monstrous flames were directly split apart by the glaive, causing sparks to fly in all directions. From afar, it looked like a beautiful flower that was blooming. It was a different kind of scenery. After dispersing the 2 fire snakes, the middle-aged man's glaive attack was also forcibly blocked. The 3rd fire snake was still like a ferocious tiger, bringing along scorching heat and raging flames as it went straight for the middle-aged man's face. Just as the 3rd snake of fire approached the middle-aged man's face, the middle-aged man suddenly released his glaive. Powerful, wind-attributed Saint force gathered in a single moment before he slammed his hand toward the snake of fire. When the hand collided with the snake of fire, there was a loud boom. The snake of fire was dispersed by the middle-aged man's hand, causing sparks to fly in all directions again, dispersing the darkness in the surroundings. After dispersing the snake of fire, the middle-aged man did not continue his attack. He stared at Mu Yun in surprise and cried out, "That's a battle skill. You actually know battle skill." No one noticed that the middle-aged man's drooping right hand had become incomparably red at this moment. Moreover, in terms of size, it was also a size larger than before. Jianqin also glanced at Mu Yun in surprise when he heard the middle-aged man's words. Jianqin was no stranger to battle skills. Instead, he knew extremely well that battle skills were an extremely precious cultivation method on the Tianyuan continent. Battle skills could be used to unleash attacks that were several times or even over 10 times more powerful than cultivation methods. They were far more precious than cultivation methods, so they were not something a normal mercenary could possess. Jianqin had never thought that Mu Yun, who seemed like a normal mercenary, would actually possess something as precious as a battle skill. It had to be mentioned that battle skills were so rare and expensive on the Tianyuan continent that even great Saint Masters could not possess them. Chapter 78. Mu Yun sneered, "You're quite knowledgeable." "That's right, it's a battle skill." The middle-aged man sucked in a deep breath as a sliver of greed immediately appeared in his gaze towards Mu Yun. Battle skills were extremely valuable on the Tianyuan continent. It was extremely difficult for regular fighters to obtain a battle skill unless they were the descendants of large clans that had been passed down for several decades or even several centuries, or the renowned experts of the continent. Although there were a few people who managed to obtain a battle skill through pure luck, it was extremely rare for something like that to happen on the Tianyuan continent. Without great fortune and great luck, it was basically impossible for them to obtain a battle skill. Although the middle-aged man was already a mid-Saint Master and could be regarded as quite a powerful expert among the bandits, he still had not grasped a single battle skill. He had been drooling over battle skills for a very long time now, but unfortunately he did not have the right to obtain one with his strength and status. The middle-aged man slightly moved his right hand and felt the burning pain from it. He could not help but feel no anger inside. Instead, he became excited. With his knowledge, he could tell with a single glance that Mu Yun's battle skill was quite powerful. Even though the battle skill was of the fire attribute, it was not necessarily suitable for wind-attributed Saint Force. He had used it, but this did not stop the middle-aged man from being eager to obtain the battle skill. This was because battle skills were just too valuable on the Tianyuan continent. The more powerful a battle skill was, the more expensive it would be. Haha, it looks like even the heavens are looking out for me today. Kid, I'll be taking everything from you. The middle-aged man laughed out loud. The middle-aged man laughed aloud. His voice was filled with indescribable excitement. It was as if Jian Chen's secret technique and Mu Yun's battle skill were already in his grasp. How arrogant! You overestimate yourself. Mu Yun sneered and struck out first. The huge, fiery red sword in his hand pierced through the pitch-black night sky with roaring flames, stabbing toward the middle-aged man's chest. As the sword swung over, a faint, vague pressure radiated from the sword, filling the surroundings. However, the pressure was extremely faint, so faint that it was almost undetectable. However, to Jianchen, who was already extremely powerful as a god, the faint pressure was still clearly sensed by him. When he sensed the source of the pressure, the surprise in his eyes became even heavier. The middle-aged man sneered as he watched the sword approach him with a powerful presence. He said, "Kid, you may be skilled in battle skills, but you're still a little too weak." As soon as his voice fell, just as the fiery red greatsword was about to touch the clothes on the middle-aged man's chest, the middle-aged man's figure suddenly disappeared like a ghost, causing Mu Yun's greatsword to miss. Seeing the middle-aged man disappear before his eyes, Mu Yun's face sank slightly. However, at this moment, an ear-piercing shriek came from behind. Without thinking, Mu Yun's huge sword immediately turned into 3 fire serpents and swung backward. In midair, the 3 fire serpents strangely fused into one, forming a fire serpent that was twice as large as the first one. Clang! With the sound of metal clashing, a large amount of sparks flew out from where the 2 of them clashed, directly submerging their bodies. Afterwards, a ring of fiery red ripples spread out from where the 2 of them clashed, rapidly expanding to a radius of over 10 meters. When the fiery red ripples swept past Jian Chen's body, the heat that still hadn't dissipated from the flames burned Jian Chen's coarse clothes black. If it weren't for the fact that Jian Chen's clothes were covered in blood, keeping them slightly moist, his clothes would probably have been set ablaze already. Mu Yun and the middle-aged man retreated from the flames in a rather messy manner. The 2 of them seemed to be in a rather horrible shape. Mu Yun's neatly tied hair had become extremely messy, while his face was pale. The fire-red sword in his right hand had become dim as well. On the other hand, the middle-aged man was wrapped in powerful, wind-attributed Saint Force. Quite a few places on his clean clothes had become black spots from the flames. Only half of his sleeves remained. Due to the use of battle skills, the disturbance created by Mu Yun and the middle-aged man's battle was much greater than Jianchen's. The large swathe of sparks immediately attracted quite a few mercenaries. Immediately, the mercenaries and bandits who were still fighting glanced in the direction of the battle. When they saw the large swathe of sparks, a few of the more knowledgeable mercenaries could not help but cry out. Those are actually tangible flames. It's impossible to create tangible flames without reaching Earth Saint Master. That's a battle skill. A battle skill. It's actually a battle skill. There's actually someone who knows a battle skill. Whether it was the mercenaries or the bandits, all of them cried out when they recognized Mu Yun's battle skill. Their gazes were filled with shock and disbelief. After all, battle skills were just far too rare and expensive on the Tianyuan continent. A few weaker mercenaries would probably never be able to see a battle skill in action in their entire lives. After their surprise, greed flickered in the eyes of most of the mercenaries and bandits. On the Tianyuan continent, battle skills were the things that every fighter coveted and desired the most. Their desire for battle skills far exceeded the desire for cultivation techniques. This was because battle skills could allow one to unleash attacks that were several times or even 10 times more powerful than one's own strength. On the Tianyuan continent, where strength was everything and where slaughter was everywhere, possessing a battle skill would give one an additional layer of protection. Jianqin could not help but frown when he saw the greed in the eyes of the mercenaries and bandits. A man's wealth was his own ruin. He understood this principle better than anyone else. Mu Yin, possessing a battle skill, had completely exceeded his expectations. Now that Mu Yin's battle skill had been exposed before so many mercenaries, it would definitely bring him endless trouble with how precious battle skills were on the Tianyuan continent. It was even possible for him to lose his life because of it. After all, Mu Yin was still far too weak right now. Jianqin could not help but worry for Mu Yin's future. Although he had not known Mu Yin for very long and could only be regarded as strangers who had met by chance, Jianqin understood that Mu Yin had become embroiled in the battle with a middle-aged man in order to save him, thus exposing his battle skill. The middle-aged man stared at Mu Yin with a burning gaze and said with a deep voice, "What a powerful battle skill! You can actually block my full-powered strike as a great saint." When he spoke up to hear, the middle-aged man's voice paused for a moment. Then the corners of his lips revealed a hint of a sneer, saying, "Even though you can temporarily display the power of a sacred expert through combat skills, this isn't your own strength in the end. I want to see how long you can last." With that, the middle-aged man raised his glaive high into the air. Just when he was about to attack Mu Yin again, several powerful presences suddenly appeared in the distance. The middle-aged man beamed with joy when he sensed the powerful presences that had suddenly appeared. In his opinion, the experts on his side had already killed the experts of the mercenary group and had come to reinforce them. At the end of the darkness in the distance, several black figures were running towards them at an extremely fast speed. In just a breath's time, the faces of the black figures appeared in everyone's line of sight. When they saw the faces of those figures, all the mercenaries immediately cheered loudly. "It's the captain! The captain and the others have returned. Captain Lang Tian! Captain Lang Tian has returned victorious! It's Captain Xiahou! They killed the experts of the Boundless Bandits." There were a total of 5 people who had returned. Every one of them had wounds of various sizes on their bodies. With the help of the flickering flames not far away, one could vaguely see that their clothes were stained with blood. There were also several corpses on their shoulders. The middle-aged man and the bandits who were still fighting with the mercenaries immediately turned grim when they heard the thunderous cheers of the mercenaries. Then the middle-aged man suddenly turned his head and stared at Captain Xiahou and the others who had returned. His eyes were filled with disbelief. You, how did you all come back alive?" The middle-aged man swallowed his saliva with difficulty and said in disbelief. When he saw this scene, the middle-aged man knew that the experts in his camp had most likely met with misfortune. Otherwise, the ones who returned would not be the mercenaries, but the experts in his camp. The middle-aged man's words attracted the attention of the 5 mercenaries who had returned. Then the 5 of them slowly put down the corpses on their shoulders and looked at the middle-aged man with murderous eyes. Sensing the strong murderous intent from the 5 of them, the middle-aged man was shocked. Without hesitation, he immediately shouted, "The situation is not good. Everyone retreat." Before he could finish speaking, the middle-aged man put away his glaive and retreated as fast as he could in a flash of light green light. Although the 5 experts who had returned were quite injured, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Moreover, there were 5 of them. The middle-aged man had no confidence in winning against them. As soon as the middle-aged man moved, 2 of the 5 experts who had just returned immediately chased after him. Hearing the middle-aged man's words, the bandits who were still struggling to hold on immediately abandoned their opponents and fled in all directions as if they had been granted amnesty. "Kill! Leave no one alive!" As one of them ordered, the remaining mercenaries immediately strode forward and chased after the remaining members of the Boundless Bandits with all their might. These mercenaries hated the Boundless Bandits to the core. How could they let them leave so easily? Not only had the experts in their camp been defeated by the mercenaries, but even the middle-aged man, who was the only one who could speak, had fled. At this moment, the members of the Boundless Bandit group had lost their will to fight. They only cared about escaping, and they didn't even have the courage to fight anymore. On the other hand, the mercenaries' morale had soared after seeing their leaders and experts defeat the experts of the Boundless Bandit group. Even those who were originally exhausted suddenly had an inexhaustible supply of energy as they pursued the fleeing bandits with all their might. Shouts and screams filled the night, but they soon quieted down. Under the leadership of the 3 experts, more than half of the remaining bandits were killed by the mercenaries. Only a few of them managed to escape. We won! We won! We defeated the Boundless Bandits. We defeated the Boundless Bandits. Chapter 79. At this moment, 2 black figures quickly ran over from afar. Very soon, they stopped in front of a group of mercenaries. The 2 of them were the mercenaries who had chased after the middle-aged man. The 2 of them were middle-aged men in their 30s or 40s. Their faces were covered in blood, and their bodies were covered in wounds. Their tattered clothes had been dyed red with blood, and their resolute faces were pale. However, their bright eyes were still brimming with energy. Seeing how the 2 of them returned empty-handed, it was obvious that they had failed to catch up to the middle-aged man. Sigh, that person possesses wind-attributed Saint Force, so he has a huge advantage in terms of speed. Even though we're stronger than him, we can't catch up to him at all in our current state. He managed to escape in the end. One of them said helplessly, "Whatever, let him escape. I never thought that he would actually be from the Boundless Bandits. No wonder he's so powerful. If it weren't for the help of a mysterious expert, we probably wouldn't have been able to make it back alive. It's already extremely fortunate that we managed to keep our lives this time," said a burly middle-aged man. The one who spoke was a tall and sturdy middle-aged man. Under the illumination of the fire, one could vaguely see that the skin on his face was rather tanned. Upon hearing the middle-aged man's words, the expressions of the other mercenaries who had gone to kill the Boundless Bandits changed slightly. There was actually a hint of relief and lingering fear in their eyes. "Captain Lang Tian, are you all right?" At this moment, a mercenary arrived before the middle-aged man and asked in concern. The middle-aged man, called Captain Lang Tian, lowered his head slightly when he heard that. He looked at his wounds and shook his head gently. "I'm fine. I can still hold on." With that, the middle-aged man glanced at the mercenaries on his shoulders. He let out a long sigh as sorrow flashed through his eyes. He said with a heavy voice, "It's a pity that Mu Yunbai, De He, and the captain of the desert mercenaries have all died to the hands of the Boundless Bandits." Many of the mercenaries became filled with sorrow when they heard that, especially the members of the desert mercenaries. Their hearts were extremely heavy. However, to the mercenaries who often roamed the Tianyuan continent and lived on the edge of the blade, who knew how many times they had experienced something like this, they had already become accustomed to it, so they calmed down very quickly. "Brothers, although we have successfully forced the Boundless Bandit group to retreat, we have only encountered a small group of them this time. If we were to encounter their large group or elite group, we would definitely have no chance of survival. Therefore, it is not wise to stay here for long. Everyone immediately count the casualties and bury the brothers who have died in battle. After that, we will hurry through the night and leave this place immediately," Commander Lang Tian said loudly. Hearing this, the mercenaries immediately became busy. Among them, the mercenaries who were more heavily injured were escorted away to be treated with medicine. As for those who were strong and not heavily injured, they were all arranged to dig holes and move the corpses. Everyone busied themselves silently. A strange silence filled the entire campsite. At that moment, no one said anything. They all silently went about their own business. The atmosphere was extremely heavy. Genshin glanced around and sighed inside. Although they had achieved the final victory against the Boundless Bandits, it had been a Pyrrhic victory. After the battle, The combined strength of the three mercenary groups had been drastically reduced. Their numbers had been reduced from several hundred to less than 100. They were less than a third of their original strength. Only 5 of the dozen or so experts who had charged out had returned, and all of them were injured. Their battle prowess had plummeted. Even the captain of one of the mercenary groups had died in the battle against the boundless bandits. "Jianchen, are you all right? Are your wounds heavy?" At this moment, a rather familiar voice rang out in Jianchen's head. When Jianchen heard that, he turned around and saw that Mu Yin had appeared behind him at some point in time. The person who had spoken was Mu Yin. Mu Yin's current condition was not very good. His face was sickly pale. His previous confrontation with the middle-aged man had not been as easy as it seemed on the surface. Although his combat skills had allowed him to unleash his strength, with his current strength, using combat skills would put a huge burden on his body. Jianchen shook his head gently and said, "I'm fine." Jianchen paused and looked at Mu Yin with a complicated gaze. He said softly, "Mu Yin, your combat skills have been discovered by many mercenaries. You should be careful along the way. Once you reach a safe place, leave this caravan as soon as possible. Otherwise, I'm afraid that some of them will do something to harm you." With Jianchen's words, Mu Yin glanced at the mercenaries who were busy in the surroundings and chuckled. "Jianchen, thank you for your kind reminder. I will be careful." Although he said that, Mu Yin didn't seem worried at all. It was as if he didn't care about these mercenaries at all. Jianchen's heart skipped a beat as he stared at Mu Yin's calm face. He seemed to be in thought. Jianchen did not believe that Mu Yin was strong enough to protect himself in the mercenary group, with the strength he had displayed against the middle-aged man. After all, Mu Yin took out a white porcelain bottle from his space ring and passed it to Jianchen. He said, "This is good medicine for healing. Take it orally and use it externally. Take it and treat your injuries." "Thank you." Jianchen did not refuse. He directly extended his hand and accepted the bottle from Mu Yin. "You're welcome. Go treat your injuries first. I'll go do some things for them as well." With that, Mu Yin left. 2 hours later, the entire caravan was cleaned up. The mercenaries who had died in the battle were all buried in a large pit. Not a single person from the boundless bandits paid any attention to them. Their corpses were still strewn across the ground. The mercenaries hated the boundless bandits so much that no one would bother to collect their corpses. During the 2 hours, Jianchen had roughly treated his injuries. He had also changed out of his clothes that had become tattered from the battle with the middle-aged man. Before they set off, Jianchen had prepared over a dozen sets of clothes in his space ring, so he did not have to worry about not being able to find a change of clothes. Set off. Once everything was ready, the entire caravan set off again under the orders of one of the leaders. They were prepared to travel through the night without any rest. After the attack by the boundless bandits, the caravan no longer dared to stay in the area, not even for a moment longer. After the battle with the boundless bandits, the caravan's defenses had been drastically weakened. They no longer had the strength to deal with the upcoming battle. After all, quite a few of the bandits had managed to escape. If the caravan did not leave, they would be surrounded by a large group of bandits before long. At that time, they would really be powerless to turn the situation around. Jianchen climbed onto his mount with great difficulty and followed the caravan through the night. Jianchen closed his eyes as he silently circulated his saint force to heal his wounds. After being struck by the middle-aged man a few times, Jianchen was quite heavily injured. At the same time, he had consumed far too much saint force. Even the most basic movements were rather difficult for him right now, let alone battle. On the Tianyuan continent, where danger could come at any time, strength was the most important thing. As a result, Jianchen did not dare to rest for even a single moment. He worked hard to recover his strength. The caravan moved forward quickly on the official road. As everyone was worried that the boundless bandits' reinforcements would catch up with them, they moved several times faster than before. Even so, They were only a little faster than an ordinary person running at full speed. After all, there were carts full of goods, so it was impossible to speed up even if they wanted to. Even at their current speed, they almost overturned their carts several times when they passed through some bumpy roads. Jianshin's eyes remained closed as he circulated his saint force to slowly heal his wounds. Due to the environment, Jianshin did not dare to focus on healing at all. As a result, his extremely heavy wounds healed at a snail's pace. Jianshin could not help but think of his mother by Yuntian. He could still clearly remember how he had injured his third brother, Chanyang-ku, a few years ago in Chanyang Prefecture. Bai Yuntian had healed Chanyang effortlessly without even leaving behind a single scar. If a Radiant Saint Master was present right now, it would probably be much easier for him to heal. Unfortunately, there were just far too few Radiant Saint Masters, and they possessed extremely great statuses. It was impossible for the 3 mercenary groups to invite them over with their current strength. Just as Jianshin thought of a Radiant Saint Master, a thought suddenly flashed through his head. He suddenly opened his eyes, and the moment he opened them, a resplendent light shot out from his eyes. Oh, right, I can sense Radiant Saint Force and absorb it. I wonder if I can control Radiant Saint Force to heal myself like a Radiant Saint Master, Jianshin thought to himself. As soon as he thought about how it was very likely that he could control Radiant Saint Force like a Radiant Saint Master, his heart immediately surged with excitement. He was unable to control his joy. Chapter 80. Jianshin sucked in a deep breath and slowly suppressed his excitement. He slowly calmed himself down. Once he calmed down, he immediately closed his eyes again without any hesitation and absorbed the energy of the world like he usually did. However, unlike before, Jianshin did not absorb the energy of the world to cultivate. Instead, he extracted the special energy from the surroundings and directly absorbed it into his body. All of this sounded simple, but it was extremely difficult to actually do. However, to Jianshin, who had an extremely powerful god, doing this was not particularly difficult. At most, he would just have to expend a little more effort. Before Jianshin's powerful god, the energy of the world could not be sensed by anyone other than Radiant Saint Masters. It immediately appeared in Jianshin's senses. Afterwards, Jianshin's powerful god was like a vacuum cleaner with great suction, wildly extracting the energy of the world. Afterwards, it slowly gathered in his body and was absorbed by him in the end. Jianshin knew extremely well that when the special energy gathered to a certain extent, it would shine with a milky white light. As a result, in order to prevent this from happening to him, Jianshin absorbed the energy at an extremely slow speed. It was as slow as a snail. When the special energy was absorbed by Jianshin, it immediately fused with his limbs. At the same time, a comfortable feeling appeared from the bottom of Jianshin's heart, filling his entire body very quickly. Jianshin only felt that his entire body was enveloped by a ball of warmth. It was extremely comfortable. As he bathed in this comfortable feeling, Jianshin seemed to enjoy it very much. Jianshin's heavily injured body began to recover at an extremely terrifying rate after fusing with the special energy. It was so fast that it left Jianshin dumbfounded. He felt disbelief. Only now did he truly experience just how terrifying the Radiant Saint Force controlled by Radiant Saint Masters was in terms of healing. The books said that a few high-level Radiant Saint Masters could not only regrow a person's arm, they could even bring the dead back to life. It looks like these words are not false at all. Judging from the healing effects of this Radiant Saint Force, perhaps a few peak high-level Radiant Saint Masters really do have such heaven-defying abilities. Jianshin thought to himself, if it was said that he held a skeptical attitude towards high-level Radiant Saint Masters being able to regrow a person's arm and bring the dead back to life, then, after tasting the healing effects of the Radiant Saint Force, he was 80% convinced. Sitting on the back of the horse, Jianshin used his soul to extract the Radiant Saint Force from the energy of the world. Afterwards, he absorbed it at a slow and steady rate. because his body was absorbing the radiant saint force. Genshin's body was enveloped by a faint layer of strange energy. This strange energy was the special energy known as radiant saint force, although there were several mercenaries gathered not too far away from Genshin, and there were even a few great saint masters. They did not notice the abnormality of Genshin's body at all. Radiant saint force was an extremely special energy. Aside from radiant saint masters, other fighters were unable to sense its existence at all. Even a few peak heaven saint masters were unable to sense radiant saint force in the surroundings. It was exactly because of this that there were so few radiant saint masters on the Tianyuan continent. Every single radiant saint master on the Tianyuan continent was born with a radiant saint force. From the moment they were born, their souls had formed a faint connection with the radiant saint force in the surroundings. As a result, they could sense the existence of radiant saint force in the surroundings. As their soul grew, they would gradually gain control over the energy. When the radiant saint force gathered to a certain extent, it would form a milky white light. Only in this way could warriors discover the existence of the radiant saint force with their eyes. They could not sense the radiant saint force like they could sense the yuan qi of the world. In their perception, the radiant saint force was a complete blank. A night passed quickly as the caravan hurried along. Not a single person in the caravan slept the entire night. They were either using the time to heal their wounds or paying close attention to the surroundings at all times. All of them were afraid of running into the boundless bandits again. In the tense atmosphere of the mercenaries, the night finally passed. Even so, none of them let down their guard. Although they were far away from their previous stop after a night of rushing, they still hadn't reached a safe place. In this area, they could still encounter bandits and robbers at any time. If this group of mercenaries were in peak condition, they would naturally not be afraid of ordinary bandits. Unfortunately, after the battle with the boundless bandits, not only were all of them injured, but their numbers were also greatly reduced. With their current strength, even if they encountered ordinary bandits, it would probably be a tough battle, although they could save their lives by discarding some of their goods. Goods that could be sent overseas were not cheap. Unless they had no other choice, neither the merchants nor the mercenaries were willing to make such a choice. When the fiery red sun slowly rose from the horizon, Genshin, who had been sitting on his horse without moving for the entire night, finally opened his eyes slowly. His eyes were filled with joy and excitement. After a night of treatment, Genshin's severe injuries that would have taken at least 5 or 6 days to heal had completely healed. Even the saint force in his body that had been depleted had reached a state of saturation. It could be said that Genshin had reached his peak condition. Furthermore, Genshin could clearly sense that the saint force in his body had increased by a lot compared to the day before. I never thought that I could actually control radiant saint force like a radiant saint master. Genshin thought to himself as ecstasy filled his heart. To him, this was definitely a delightful discovery. With such an ability, his life in the future would have an additional layer of protection. No matter how severe his injuries were, he would be able to recover as quickly as possible at any time. While he was pleasantly surprised, Genshin was also shocked by the effects of radiant saint force on his injuries. If his injuries were treated with medicine, it would have taken him 4 or 5 days to completely recover. But with radiant saint force, he had completely recovered in a single night. Furthermore, Genshin had purposefully slowed down the rate at which he absorbed radiant saint force. After all, he did not want to reveal his ability to control radiant saint force by gathering radiant saint force too quickly. Genshin was extremely clear that the fact that he could control radiant saint force like a radiant saint master was not something that could be easily leaked unless it was absolutely necessary. He had considered everything very thoroughly. Perhaps at a critical moment, his ability to control radiant saint force would have an unexpected effect. Although the status of a radiant saint master was extremely high in the Tianyuan continent, but compared to his own life, this honor was nothing. Afterwards, the caravan's journey was quite peaceful. Aside from the occasional harassment from 1 or 2 weak magical beasts, they did not encounter any attacks from bandits or powerful magical beasts. Just like this, the caravan hurried for a few days. The journey that would have taken 10 days was shortened to 6 days. After 3 days of continuous travel, the caravan finally made it through the most dangerous part of the journey and arrived at the border fortress of the Blue Wind Kingdom. Looking at the faintly discernible tall city walls in the distance, all of the mercenaries had a happy smile on their face. Until this moment, they felt relieved. Although there was still a long way to go, and the road was not necessarily safe, but not far from the Blue Wind Kingdom, there was a small town. In this town, they could recruit some mercenaries to supplement their fighting strength. We have arrived at the Blue Wind Kingdom. We have finally arrived at the Blue Wind Kingdom. Now that we are all safe, we don't have to worry about the boundless bandits chasing us anymore. Many of the mercenaries couldn't help but cry out. Their voices were filled with excitement, and even Jianqin couldn't help but smile. At this moment, he felt a lot more relaxed. After all, his current strength was still too weak. Once he encountered bandits that even these mercenaries couldn't stop, he would be in for a tough time. Although they could see the tall walls in the distance, they were still nearly 10 miles away from the border fortress. Once they got closer to the border fortress, they could see several figures and caravans passing by from time to time. The distance of 10 miles was covered in a blink of an eye. When the caravan arrived at the border of the border fortress, they were stopped by a famous guard. "Stop right there. Where did you come from?" A soldier who seemed to be the leader of the group scanned the caravan with a sharp gaze and shouted. Naturally, someone from the caravan would take care of this matter. A mercenary immediately stepped forward and negotiated with the soldier who seemed to be the leader. At the same time, a few golden dots of light flashed in his hand, and he carefully stuffed them into the soldier's hand. The guard clenched his fist and carefully rubbed it a few times. Gradually, a satisfied smile appeared on his face. He waved his hand and said loudly, "You can go in." Soon after, the caravan successfully passed through the border fortress of the Blue Wind Kingdom and entered the territory of the Blue Wind Kingdom. After passing through the border fortress, Jianqin immediately felt a lot more at ease. This way, he had at least successfully escaped from the Huayun sect's sphere of influence. Although the Huayun sect's influence in the kingdom of Jessen was very large, Jianqin believed that their hands could not reach as far as the Blue Wind Kingdom. Not far from the border fortress of the Blue Wind Kingdom, there was a small city. After the caravan parked the caravan filled with goods, the mercenaries dispersed and went to rest, leaving only 2 people to look after the goods. The place where the goods were parked was specially arranged by the Chamber of Commerce. This was where all the goods of the caravan were stored. There were experts sent by the Chamber of Commerce to guard this place, ensuring the safety of these goods. Therefore, by parking the goods here, there was no need to worry about the possibility of theft. Chapter 81. After the goods were parked, it was free time for the mercenaries to move around. At the same time, it was also time for everyone to rest. However, because they had been traveling day and night without rest for the past few days, everyone was very tired. So when everyone was dismissed, they scattered. Most of them didn't even have time to eat and found a restaurant to sleep. Some of them who were injured also hurried to treat their injuries. Jianqin tied up his horse and glanced around. Finally, he stopped at the back of a person wearing simple clothes. Then he cautiously looked around and finally walked towards the back of the person. Jianqin came to the back of the person wearing simple clothes and said in a low voice, "Muyin, the fact that you have a combat skill has been known by many mercenaries. Now, you should take this opportunity to leave quickly. Otherwise, I'm afraid that they will do something unfavorable to you." Hearing Jianqin's words, Muyin looked back at Jianqin and said with a smile, "Don't worry, it's not that easy to get my combat skill." Hearing this, Jianqin frowned. Xiao Chen frowned slightly and gave Muyin a deep look. He smiled faintly and said, "Since that is the case, I will not waste any more words. Speaking up to here, Genshin paused for a moment and then continued. Since we have successfully arrived at the Blue Wind Kingdom, then I will also leave the mercenary group. We won't be able to travel together for the rest of the journey. Brother Muyin, take care. Genshin cupped his fist at Muyin. Although it was the first time that Genshin and Muyin met, the two of them had a good relationship and could talk to each other. Moreover, in order to save Genshin, Muyin exposed the fact that he had a combat skill. Therefore, in Genshin's heart, Muyin had a good impression. However, this was not enough for Genshin to include Muyin in his list of friends. You also take care. Muyin also cupped his fist and replied, 2 friends, are you planning to leave? Everyone has worked hard along the way. We have already prepared good food and wine. Why don't we all have a good meal together? At this moment, a deep voice suddenly came. A big man wearing black clothes walked towards Genshin and Muyin with a smile on his face. Looking at this big man, Genshin was slightly stunned, but he quickly recovered and immediately cupped his fist. So, it's leader Lang Tian. In the past few days, Genshin had become much more familiar with the people of these 3 mercenary groups. As for the large man in black, he was precisely the leader of the mercenary group, Lang Tian. He was a great Saint Master expert. As soon as he saw leader Lang Tian, Muyin also put down what he was doing and cupped his fist towards leader Lang Tian with a smile, which could be considered as a greeting. My 2 friends, may I know how to address you? It's really our fault that we were attacked by the Boundless Bandits this time. Fortunately, we managed to repel the Boundless Bandits in the end. During this period of time, we have to thank the both of you for your help. Otherwise, I'm afraid our casualties would have been even greater. Leader Lang Tian had a gentle smile on his face, looking like a kind uncle. I'm Genshin. Leader Lang Tian, you're too polite. This time we were able to successfully repel the Boundless Bandits because leader Lang Tian led the team to kill the experts in the opposing camp. Genshin had a faint smile on his face as he replied with a light chuckle. I'm Muyin. Brother Genshin is right. This time we were able to successfully repel the Boundless Bandits because leader Lang Tian killed the experts in the opposing camp. Otherwise, I'm afraid that even we wouldn't have a chance to survive. Muyin also said with a smile. After hearing Genshin and Muyin's words, a look of shame flashed across leader Lang Tian's eyes, but he quickly concealed it. He then said, Genshin, Muyin, these 2 friends are too polite. No matter what the final result is, I still want to thank you on behalf of the entire Lang Tian mercenary group. These days, everyone was worried that the Boundless Bandits would catch up to them, so we've been hurrying along day and night. It's really been hard on the 2 of you. Now that we've prepared good food and wine, why don't we all have a good meal and then have a good rest for a few days to ease the fatigue of these days? All right. These days, I've been eating rations all day. I've almost forgotten what meat tastes like. It just so happens that I'm planning to have a good meal later. Since leader Lang Tian has already prepared food and wine, I'll save on the cost of a meal. Muyin very straightforwardly agreed. He then looked at Genshin and said, Brother Genshin, why don't we go together? These days, you've been eating rations all day. I'm sure you're tired of it. Hearing this, Genshin shook his head slightly and said, I appreciate leader Lang Tian's kindness, but I still have important matters to attend to, so I have to leave immediately. I won't be able to accompany you brothers to drink. If I've offended you in any way, I hope leader Lang Tian can forgive me. A trace of regret appeared on leader Lang Tian's face. However, since Genshin had already said so, he couldn't continue to urge him to stay. He could only cup his hands and say, Since Brother Genshin has important matters to attend to, then I won't delay Brother Genshin's time to avoid disturbing you. Afterwards, Genshin directly left after bidding farewell to leader Lang Tian. For a mercenary like him, who had joined the caravan midway, his freedom was not restricted in any way. Therefore, Jianqin could leave whenever he wanted. There was no need for him to report to anyone. Not long after Jianqin left, leader Lang Tian, who was dressed in black, gathered with several mercenaries in a room of a restaurant. They were discussing something in low voices. "Kabo, are you sure that the mercenary called Mu Yun had a battle skill on him?" The one who spoke was a middle-aged man wearing a white gown who was sitting beside leader Lang Tian. The middle-aged man had a medium build. His long black hair was tied behind his head with a string. On his bronze skin, there was an exceptionally sinister wound. From the blood scars that had yet to completely fall off, it was very obvious that this wound had been inflicted recently. Yes, leader, by Fei Yun. When that mercenary called Mu Yun used his battle skill, many people here saw it. It definitely wasn't fake. A mercenary immediately opened his mouth to reply. "Yes, leader, by Fei Yun, leader Lang Tian. I believe that as long as our brothers who survived this matter, they can all testify to this matter. Mu Yun definitely used a battle skill, and it was a battle skill of quite a high grade." Someone immediately agreed. Originally, these mercenaries would have reported such an important matter long ago. Unfortunately, at that time, they could have encountered the boundless bandits' troops at any time. It was uncertain whether they would be able to keep their lives. Therefore, at that time, no one cared about the battle skill. After all, even if you obtained a battle skill, if you did not have the life to enjoy it, then in the end it would all be for naught. But now it was different. They had entered the Blue Wind Kingdom, which meant that they were temporarily safe. At this time, they finally spoke of the battle skill that Mu Yun possessed. Although they were a group of mercenaries, the living environment of the Tianyuan continent was extremely cruel. Even some mercenaries would act like bandits when they saw something that made them jealous. Things like this were not uncommon on the Tianyuan continent. Hearing the words of the two mercenaries, the other people in the room frowned at the same time. The middle-aged man in a white robe looked at leader Lang Tian, who was dressed in black, and said, "Leader Lang Tian, what do you think about this matter?" Leader Lang Tian frowned and thought for a while. Then he slowly opened his mouth and said, "I think Mu Yun himself should know that the matter of his battle skill has been leaked. But what I don't understand is, with his strength as a great saint, after knowing that the matter of his battle skill has been leaked, why didn't he choose to escape from here at the first moment? Instead, he continued to stay with us. Isn't he afraid that we will have designs on his battle skill? Taking a step back, even if he believes us, isn't he worried that the matter of his battle skill will be leaked from our mouths? It will cause him endless trouble and even cause him to lose his life." Leader Lang Tian analyzed. Although he looked more like a simple-minded, burly man, he was not stupid at all. If that's the case, then this mercenary named Mu Yun is either an idiot with a screw loose in his head, or he has something to rely on that makes him so fearless. The middle-aged man in the white robe muttered to himself. Hearing this, leader Lang Tian spoke again. "I've been in contact with Mu Yun before. In my opinion, Mu Yun is not an idiot with a problem in his head. Moreover, he seems to be an experienced veteran mercenary. How could such a person make such a fatal mistake? Do any of you know the origin of this Mu Yun?" The middle-aged man in a white robe continued to ask. "This Mu Yun joined us midway and traveled with us. As for his background, we don't know. After all, some mercenaries who want to travel long distances will almost always join a caravan to ensure a smooth journey. For such a person, it's not good for us to get to the bottom of the matter." The one who spoke was a middle-aged man in a green robe. His face was slightly pale. If Jianqin were present, he would definitely recognize this middle-aged man with a single glance. He was the person who had agreed to let him travel with the caravan in the kingdom of Jessen. The mercenaries in the room fell silent. After a while, a mercenary finally could not help but ask, "Leader, are we going to do it or not? If we successfully obtain the battle skill, it'll be quite the fortune for us. Even if we don't use it, if we sell it, it'll definitely fetch an astronomical price with how precious battle skills are on the Tianyuan continent. Moreover, this battle skill is of quite a high grade." "Leader, Why don't we take a gamble? Another mercenary suggested as eagerness flickered in his eyes. Leader Lang Tian frowned, but he did not agree immediately. Instead, he looked at the middle-aged man in white robes beside him and asked, Leader Bai Yunfei, may I ask if you have any ideas about this matter? The middle-aged man who was referred to as Leader Bai Yunfei frowned. The light in his eyes flickered as he hesitated. After a long moment of thought, Bai Yunfei finally spoke. Captain Lang Tian, I'm sure you remember when we were fighting with the boundless bandits a few days ago. In the end, there was a mysterious person who helped us from the shadows, right? Bai Yunfei's voice was heavy with emotion. The expressions of the mercenaries in the room changed slightly when they heard what Leader Bai Yunfei had said. Apart from the 5 people who had returned, no one else knew about what had happened, so they naturally did not know. Originally, these mercenaries believed that the boundless bandits had been killed by their leader and a few other experts working together. However, it seemed that this was not the case at all. Chapter 82. Hearing Captain Lang Tian's words, the faces of the mercenaries in the room who were unaware of the situation changed greatly. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with shock and disbelief. Lang Tian continued, Captain Bai Yunfei, I reckon you're also worried about that mysterious expert and Mu Yun having some sort of connection. Bai Yunfei nodded, saying, if it weren't for the fact that Mu Yin still stayed here without any scruples after the matter of him possessing a battle skill was exposed, I wouldn't have associated him with that mysterious expert. What you say makes a lot of sense. Lang Tian opened his mouth. If Mu Yin really has some sort of connection with that mysterious expert, then we absolutely can't make a move. Otherwise, the consequences will be even more serious than if we ran into the boundless bandits. That mysterious expert can absolutely destroy our entire team with ease. Bai Yunfei's face was also solemn as he said in a deep voice, pass down the order. No one is to mention the matter of Mu Yun possessing a battle skill again. Everyone is to act as if they don't know anything about this matter at all. After bidding farewell to Mu Yin, Jianqin wandered around this city called Black Wind City. Black Wind City was a small city, but because it was close to the border stronghold of the Blue Wind Empire, the entire city was bustling with activity everywhere. The flow of people was also very large, and merchants and mercenaries from other countries could be seen everywhere. Arriving at a place not far from the mercenary union, Jianqin directly found a restaurant to stay in. These days of running around through the night had made him feel a burst of exhaustion. First, he casually ate a few things in the restaurant. After drinking and eating to his heart's content, Jianqin was led directly by the restaurant's waiter to his room. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, Jianqin didn't sleep. Instead, he took out several Class 1 monster cores from his space belt and began to cultivate. Right now, he didn't dare to slow down his increase in strength for even a moment. As long as he had the time, Jianqin would take out the monster cores to cultivate. This was because only when he was strong enough to not belong to the Huayun sect, or even strong enough to make the Huayun sect feel fear, would he be able to openly return home. Although he wouldn't necessarily be discovered by the Huayun sect if he were to sneak back, with the arrogance that came from Jianqin's bones, he clearly wouldn't be able to do such a thing. The energy within the monster cores was rapidly draining away at a terrifying speed. Then it poured into Jianqin's body through his pores and was finally absorbed by him. However, of this enormous amount of energy, only 1% was truly absorbed by Jianqin. Of this, 99% was absorbed by the purple and green dots of light that had mysteriously appeared in his dantian. These 2 dots of light were like bottomless pits. No matter how much energy they absorbed, they wouldn't change in the slightest. As for the matter of his dantian, Jianqin was also helpless. This was simply not something he could control. Right now, he could only allow the 2 dots of light in his dantian to steal his energy. However, the one thing that made Jianqin feel rather comfortable was that although the consumption of monster cores was several hundred times greater than before, his cultivation speed was actually faster than before. This made Jianqin feel a bit of comfort in his heart. Early the next morning, when the warm and gentle sunlight shone on the ground, Genshin also woke up from his cultivation state. Opening his eyes, Genshin looked at the Class 1 monster cores in his hands that had completely disappeared. He couldn't help but bitterly smile as he sighed. This consumption is really too great. I've used up more than 50 Class 1 monster cores in a single night of cultivation. Although I still have some monster cores in my space ring, at this rate, I'm afraid I can only last for 10 days at most. Genshin got off the bed and moved his legs slightly. Then he went to the window and looked at the unceasing flow of people on the street outside. He muttered, "The matter of cultivation absolutely cannot be stopped. If I don't have monster cores, just by absorbing the yuan qi of heaven and earth, my cultivation speed will only be 1/10 of my usual speed. This is not desirable. It seems that I have to find a way to replenish my monster cores." Then Genshin left the room and went to the bottom floor of the restaurant. He casually found an empty table and sat down. "Sir, what would you like to eat?" Just as Genshin sat down, the enthusiastic restaurant waiter greeted him with a face full of smiles. A plate of stir-fried tiger meat, 2 side dishes, and a bowl of white rice. Genshin casually ordered a few side dishes. "Okay, sir, please wait a moment." Sitting at the table with a bit of boredom, Genshin casually glanced around the restaurant. The size of this restaurant was not large, and could only be considered medium in Black Wind City. However, it was currently morning, and it was the time for merchants and mercenaries to eat. Therefore, there were already many people sitting in the restaurant. Originally, there were 30 to 40 tables, but now there were less than 5. The restaurant was very noisy. Many mercenaries were talking loudly, not caring about the feelings of others. "Sir, your dishes are here." Genshin did not have to wait for long. Soon, the restaurant waiter brought the dishes that Genshin ordered and carefully placed them on the table. Genshin ate breakfast while listening to the mercenaries chatting in the restaurant. Although the restaurant was very noisy, the people gathered here were all mercenaries who had traveled extensively. From their mouths, he could hear a lot of interesting and new things. At this moment, a few men dressed as mercenaries came in from the entrance of the restaurant. There were a total of 5 people. Except for 3 young men who looked to be in their 20s or 30s, the other 2 were middle-aged men in their 40s. They were all wearing cyan robes. It was not difficult to tell that they belonged to the same mercenary group by the silver badge hanging on their chests. Moreover, this mercenary group had a silver badge. The level of this mercenary group was not low. As soon as the 5 of them entered the restaurant, their eyes swept around. But now was the peak time for eating. The tables in the restaurant had long been occupied. There were no empty seats. "What bad luck, there are no seats." A thin young man wearing a cyan robe cursed aloud. The young man standing next to him swept his eyes around the restaurant and finally stopped at Genshin, who occupied a table. He smiled and said, "Gon Ho, who said there are no seats. You see, there is only one table. Although it is a bit crowded for us to sit at the same table, there is nothing we can do about it." Although there were still many people in the restaurant besides Genshin, who sat alone at a table, it was obvious that these people were not easy to deal with. Only Genshin alone did not seem to be a threat. Therefore, the young man naturally targeted Genshin. Hearing this, their eyes gathered on Genshin, who was wearing a white robe. When they saw Genshin, who looked to be in his 20s, a malicious smile appeared on their faces. Then, the 5 of them walked over at the same time. When they arrived at Genshin's table, the young man called Gon Ho patted Genshin's shoulder and said with a fake smile, "Friend, we are taking this table now. You should find another one." Hearing that, Genshin frowned. He raised his head slightly and glanced at the 5 of them. When his powerful soul sensed that the 5 of them were not very powerful, he immediately relaxed. He said, "Sorry, I also need to use this table right now." Genshin did not fear the 5 of them at all. Although 2 of them were quite old, they were not very strong. After all, the strength of one's strength was not solely determined by age. Some people with outstanding talent could become top experts renowned throughout the continent at a young age, while some people with mediocre talent would never be able to condense a saint weapon and cross the threshold of the saint realm. Gon Ho's face immediately sank. He looked at Jianqin coldly and said in a deep voice, "Brat, don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. If you know what's good for you, piss off immediately." Chapter 83. Jianqin's expression changed slightly. His originally calm gaze turned sharp after hearing Gon Ho's words. Although his current strength was still too weak, this didn't mean that Jianqin was a coward. Jianqin slowly put down his chopsticks. His lips trembled slightly as he said in a low voice, "Just the few of you aren't qualified to occupy my table." Hearing this, Gon Ho was stunned at first, but then he sneered. He stared coldly at Jianqin. The intense, killing intent in his eyes was undisguised. If Jianqin really didn't know how to appreciate his kindness, he wouldn't mind crippling him. In his opinion, Jianqin's weak figure and his young age didn't look like a powerful cultivator. "Brat, since you don't know what's good for you, I'll let your big brother Monkey teach you a good lesson so that you'll remember." After saying that, Gon Ho directly slapped towards Jianqin's face. Before the slap arrived, the violent wind caused by the slap caused Jianqin's hair to tremble slightly. From this, it could be seen that Gon Ho's slap wasn't light. A cold light flashed through Jianqin's eyes. He immediately snorted coldly and grabbed a pair of chopsticks with his right hand. With lightning speed, he stabbed towards Gon Ho's incoming slap. Jianqin's right hand moved extremely quickly. It was so fast that it was difficult for others to catch sight of it. Before Gon Ho could react, Jianqin's right hand had already made contact with Gon Ho's palm. When the two came into contact, the chopsticks in Jianqin's right hand were like sharp iron spikes that easily pierced through Gon Ho's palm. Ah! The excruciating pain from his palm caused Gon Ho to let out a cry of agony. His voice was mournful, and it reverberated through the entire restaurant. Everyone could hear it clearly. Immediately, many gasps of surprise rang out in the restaurant. This result was clearly very different from what they had expected. Everyone in the restaurant cast surprised glances at Jianqin. However, when some of the more discerning people saw that Jianqin had pierced Gon Ho's palm with a chopstick, their expressions immediately became grave. Subsequently, their gazes towards Jianqin also changed slightly. Many of their gazes were filled with deep shock. What kind of strength did it take to pierce a palm with a wooden chopstick? At the very least, none of them could do it. After piercing Gon Ho's palm with the chopstick, Jianqin suddenly kicked out with his right leg. He ruthlessly kicked Gon Ho's chest, sending his frail body flying 3 meters away. In the end, he crashed over a table and fell to the ground in a sorry state. The few mercenaries sitting at that table immediately distanced themselves from the restaurant in fear of being implicated. Although Jianqin didn't seem very old, the strength and ruthlessness he displayed at this moment had deterred many people in the restaurant. The few mercenaries sitting at that table naturally wouldn't fall out with Jianqin over such a small matter. Seeing Gon Ho's fate, the 4 mercenaries who came with Gon Ho were clearly stunned for a moment. However, they quickly recovered and glared at Jianqin, their eyes filled with killing intent. "You actually dare to make a move against our grand desert mercenary group? Are you tired of living?" A young man's face was filled with anger as he angrily shouted at Jianqin. Before he finished speaking, a large sword suddenly appeared in his hand, and he waved it towards Jianqin. The corner of Jianqin's mouth curled up into a sneer. Then, with a light snort, a slender silver sword appeared in his hand. Near the hilt of the sword, 2 words were engraved on the surface of the sword: "Breeze." The Breeze sword was the divine sword that Jianqin used in his previous life. It was Jianqin's personal sword and was extremely famous in Jianghu. Anyone who practiced martial arts would know of it. In this life, Jianqin had reincarnated into this world and was still using the breeze sword. Moreover, the shape of the breeze sword was exactly the same as the one he used in his previous life. From this, it could be seen just how deep Jianqin's feelings toward swords were. As soon as the breeze sword appeared, under Jianqin's control, it transformed into a silver bolt of lightning and pierced towards the young man at an unbelievable speed. When the young man's sword was halfway there, the breeze sword was like a ghost as it suddenly appeared in front of his throat. The tip of the sword had already pierced through the outer layer of skin on the young man's throat, revealing a dark red stain. Feeling a slight pain in his throat, the young man's face changed greatly. In an instant, his face became as white as a sheet of paper without a trace of blood. Drops of cold sweat began to form on his forehead and covered his entire forehead in a blink of an eye. The large sword in his hand was also stopped in midair under his control. His body was still in the same position as before, not daring to move in the slightest. At this moment, the young man's appearance was as if he had been imprisoned by a mysterious force. Looking at the silver sword that had appeared in front of the young man's throat, the originally noisy restaurant suddenly fell into a strange silence. Everyone's eyes were wide open as they stared at the breeze sword in Jianqin's hand. Their eyes were filled with disbelief and disbelief. As for how the sword had appeared in front of the young man's throat, only 2 or 3 people in the restaurant could vaguely catch a glimpse of it. Most of them didn't even see the silver sword. All they saw was a flash of white light that was extremely fast. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. A moment later, the sound of people sucking in a breath of cold air could be heard in the quiet restaurant. At this moment, everyone in the restaurant looked at Jianqin with deep shock in their eyes. The young man whose throat was held by Jianqin did not dare to move. It was as if he was afraid that if he moved, the sword would pierce through his throat. "Little brother, please be merciful. We are from the desert mercenary group. This matter is our fault. We hope that you can let our companion go." At this time, a middle-aged man opened his mouth to speak. His tone was extremely gentle, and even the expression on his face was one of sincerity. Hearing this, Jianqin glanced at the middle-aged man. After hesitating for a moment, he slowly put down the breeze sword in his hand and coldly said, "Scram!" Hearing this, the young man whose throat was held by Jianqin had a flash of anger in his eyes. But since he had just escaped death, he didn't dare to say anything. When the breeze sword disappeared from his hand, Jianqin's cold gaze swept over the few people. Immediately, he took out a gold coin from his dimensional storage and threw it on the table. His voice was calm as he said, "Waiter, the bill." Following this, Jianqin directly walked out of the restaurant. After what had happened, Jianqin didn't have the heart to continue staying here. Moreover, after eating and drinking, his stomach was already full. Then, before Jianqin had even taken a few steps, the middle-aged man who had spoken to Jianqin had a murderous look in his eyes. Immediately, he looked at the other 3 people and nodded. Then, as if they had already discussed this beforehand, the 4 of them each took out a weapon and attacked Jianqin from different directions. Feeling the movement behind him, Jianqin's eyes turned cold. A strong murderous look flashed in his eyes as his body slightly swayed. Just as the weapons were about to hit him, Jianqin's body had already moved 2 meters forward at an extremely fast speed, dodging the attack range of the weapons behind him. At the same time, the light-wind sword appeared in his right hand. Jianqin abruptly turned around and faced the 4 people. Taking a step forward, he closed the distance between himself and the 4 people. His right hand suddenly shook and the light-wind sword was thrust towards the middle-aged man closest to him. Following a flash of white light, the light-wind sword had already closed in on the middle-aged man's body and was heading towards his throat. This middle-aged man's strength was clearly not weak. At the very least, he was much stronger than the young man from before. Seeing Jianqin's light-wind sword coming towards him, the middle-aged man's face immediately became serious. Immediately, he used the fastest speed he could muster to pull back his sword and block in front of his throat. Ding! Just as the middle-aged man finished his action, the tip of the light wind sword had already pierced through the middle-aged man's palm-sized sword. Following a metallic sound, a shallow mark appeared on the surface of the sword. With his sword blocked, Genshin's face revealed a trace of ridicule. His eyes flashed, and in the next moment, the light wind sword's blade suddenly exploded with a hazy light. Although it wasn't very strong, the hidden sharpness was felt by many people in the restaurant. Following that, Genshin's foot kicked off the ground, and at the same time his body twisted. His entire body was suspended in the air in a straight line as he quickly rotated. The light wind sword also rotated under the influence of Genshin's spinning speed. At the tip of the sword, a powerful sword chi was released. SSSSSS. Following an extremely unpleasant sound, the light wind sword rotated at an extremely fast speed. The powerful piercing force from the light wind sword drilled a 2-finger-wide hole into the middle-aged man's sword. Then, the light wind sword continued to penetrate the middle-aged man's sword like a hot knife through butter. Finally, under the middle-aged man's shocked gaze, the light wind sword pierced through his throat. Lightly landing on the ground, Genshin's movements were calm and unrestrained. Immediately after, he pulled out the light wind sword from the middle-aged man's throat. Without hesitation, before the other 3 people could react, the light wind sword once again turned into a silver bolt of lightning and pierced towards the young man who had attacked him before. Pooh! Facing Genshin's extremely fast sword, the young man who was much weaker than the middle-aged man had no way of resisting. Before he could even react, the light wind sword had already pierced through his throat, causing fresh red blood to spurt out. In less than a breath's time, Genshin had successfully killed 2 people. This kind of speed made everyone in the restaurant unable to believe their eyes. Chapter 84. The actions of the 2 startled all the bystanders in the restaurant. However, they didn't think much of it. In the Tianyuan continent, there were all kinds of people. There were some who would rather throw away their lives than admit their mistakes. There were also some who were afraid of death, who would do anything when their lives were in danger, even betraying their brothers and friends. Genshin slowly lowered the light wind sword and pointed it at the ground. His eyes were cold as he looked at the 2 begging mercenaries. His eyebrows slightly wrinkled as he looked at them with a look of disdain. Towards people who were afraid of death, Genshin hated them the most. Seeing Genshin lower his sword, the 2 begging mercenaries thought that Genshin was really going to let them go. Their faces couldn't help but reveal a trace of joy. But before they could be happy for long, a cold and indifferent sentence caused their happy faces to freeze. I already gave you a chance before, but unfortunately, you didn't cherish it. Now, begging for mercy is already too much. A deep and cold voice came out from Genshin's mouth. As soon as he finished speaking, Genshin's right hand suddenly turned into a blur and swept out. Under the control of his arm, the light wind sword in his right hand turned into a silver bolt of lightning and pierced towards the 2 mercenaries. Before the 2 mercenaries could even react, the sharp edge of the light wind sword had already cut through their necks, leaving behind a thin line of blood. In the next moment, a large amount of blood flowed out from the small wound and dyed their necks red. If the 2 mercenaries had resisted, then it would have been impossible for Genshin to kill them without a bit of effort. If they were lucky, then they might have been able to escape from Genshin's hands. Unfortunately, they had already been frightened by Genshin's lightning-fast killing of 2 of their companions. The fear in their hearts had caused them to lose all will to resist, which was why they were so easily killed by Genshin. After effortlessly killing the 2 mercenaries, Genshin's body flickered as he once again appeared in front of the last mercenary. The light wind sword in his hand turned into a silver ray of light as it sliced through the mercenary's neck. In just a few breaths of time, the 5 mercenaries of the Great Desert Mercenary Group had all died at the hands of Genshin. After killing the 5 mercenaries, Genshin's expression didn't change in the slightest. He then took out a few gold coins from his spatial belt and indifferently said, "These gold coins can be considered as your cleanup fee." With that said, Genshin calmly walked out of the restaurant. The Tianyuan continent was an extremely cruel world. Here, there were conflicts and killings occurring everywhere. The people of the Tianyuan continent had long since become accustomed to these kinds of things. Although a massacre had occurred in the restaurant, to the diners of the restaurant, as long as it didn't involve them, it was completely fine. The bloody scene didn't affect their appetite at all. Watching Genshin leave, the entire restaurant fell into a strange silence. At this moment, everyone forgot to eat as they stared blankly at the direction in which Genshin had left and at the 5 dead mercenaries. From their eyes, one could see the shock and disbelief in their eyes. After a long while, the sound of a cold breath being sucked in could be heard from the quiet restaurant. Following that, a voice filled with amazement could be heard. What a fast sword! Not only was it so fast that people couldn't react to it, but it also had such precise control. This is the first time I've seen such a thing in all my years in the Tianyuan continent. The one who spoke was a middle-aged man wearing a blue robe. At the same time, he was also one of the few people in the restaurant who could vaguely see the sword's shadow. This person doesn't look old, but his strength isn't weak. Moreover, his attacks are very ruthless, directly killing with one strike. It seems like he isn't someone from a big family, or he has a very powerful master behind him. I wonder what his name is. With his strength, it would be great if he could join our mercenary group. At that time, our mercenary group's strength would increase by quite a lot, a young man softly murmured. With that, a person who seemed to be around the same age as the young man beside him said, "All right, stop dreaming. He seems much younger than you, yet he possesses such strength. A person like him definitely doesn't have a simple identity. A small mercenary group like ours can't attract an expert like him. Moreover, he killed 5 members of the Grand Desert Mercenary Group here, so they definitely won't let this matter go. If he really does join us, he might even cause us a lot of trouble. After all, a small mercenary group like ours is not the opponent of the Grand Desert Mercenary Group that has over 1,000 people." After leaving the restaurant, Jian Chen directly went to the mercenary trade union. He found a mission to escort a caravan and accepted it. Fortunately, the mission Jian Chen accepted wasn't far, so with his mercenary rank, he was still able to accept the mission. Wake City was a 3rd-grade city. Although it was only a 3rd-grade city, its tall and thick walls were comparable to a 1st-grade city's. This was because, in a mountain range not far from Wake City, lived a large number of magic beasts. These magic beasts would often attack the city on a large scale, so even though Wake City was only a 3rd-grade city, its walls were extremely sturdy. This was also to prevent magic beast attacks. At noon, the fiery red sun in the sky emitted a dazzling light. The intense light made it difficult for people to raise their heads to look at the sky. Many mercenaries who walked on the road half closed their eyes to reduce the sun's irritation to their eyes. Outside of Wake City, a caravan of 200 to 300 people was slowly advancing on the main road towards the city gates that weren't very tall. This damned weather, why is it so hot? How can we live like this? In the caravan, a half-naked man couldn't help but curse. As he spoke, he took out a water bottle and fiercely gulped down a few mouthfuls of water. Not far from the burly man, a young man dressed in simple and coarse clothes was sitting on a white horse with his eyes closed. Looking at his serene appearance, it was as if he had fallen asleep. The youth's appearance was very ordinary. He was the kind of person that could be easily found in a crowd. From his appearance, he seemed to be in his 20s. Although the sun was high in the sky, the youth still covered his entire body tightly. Although his clothes weren't too thick, it wasn't something that an ordinary person could bear. The most surprising thing was that there wasn't a single drop of sweat on the youth's forehead. Compared to the half-naked mercenaries and merchants in the caravan, This youth's appearance was clearly different. Although many mercenaries and merchants kept looking at the youth with strange gazes, none of them went up to talk to him. This youth was Jianqin. Chapter 85. After successfully escorting the caravan to Wake City, Jianqin left the caravan and went directly to the mercenary trade union to turn in the mission. He received a certain amount of honor points and a small amount of money. Because Wake City was close to the magical Beast Mountain Range, there were many more mercenaries here than in other cities. Most of the mercenaries here valued the good geographical environment and stayed here for long periods of time. It was convenient for them to enter the magical Beast Mountain Range and hunt magical beasts for money. Although hunting magical beasts was much more dangerous than escorting caravans, it was still a way to make a lot of money. Even though there were people who died at the hands of magical beasts every day, the high value of monster cores and the huge demand for them made many mercenaries put their lives on the line and risk their lives to hunt magical beasts. After all, monster cores were far too precious on the Tianyuan continent. Almost everyone needed them, and the demand for them was extremely high. Once one obtained a monster core, one could directly absorb the energy within the monster core to increase one's cultivation speed. Furthermore, even if one did not use the monster core, one could still exchange it for a considerable amount of money. The mercenary trade union was very noisy, and there were many mercenaries inside. The large trade union was filled with hundreds of people, and most of them were topless. Their strong physiques and defined muscles were exposed in front of everyone, as if they were showing off their strength. In this hot weather, the mercenary trade union's ventilation wasn't very advanced. A sour and pungent smell of sweat pervaded the air, causing Jianqin, who rarely smelled this kind of smell, to furrow his brows and cover his nose with one hand. After leaving the mercenary trade union, Jianqin casually restocked in the city and bought a map of the magical Beast Mountain Range. He then directly left Wake City and headed towards the magical Beast Mountain Range alone under the scorching sun. The mountain range of magical beasts was only about 30 kilometers away from Wake City. Jianqin rode his white horse and galloped for 2 hours before finally arriving at the edge of the mountain range of magical beasts. At the edge of the magical Beast Mountain Range was a forest, and in the depths of the forest was a vast mountain range. Not only did the mountain range contain a large number of magical beasts, but the environment was also extremely vile. According to the description of the magical Beast Mountain Range on the map, the forest was filled with poisonous snakes and insects, and swamps were everywhere. The slightest carelessness could cause one to fall into a swamp. Without the help of teammates, it would be very difficult to escape with one's life. As the saying goes, danger and opportunity coexist. Although the magical Beast Mountain Range is very dangerous, at the same time, there is also a certain amount of opportunity. In the magical Beast Mountain Range, there are often magical beasts that kill each other for various reasons. And these magical beasts that are killed by their own kind usually have their magic cores intact. If one's luck is good enough, one can even come across 1 or 2 corpses that still have their magic cores intact. However, such a probability is very small. It's not that magic cores are useless to magical beasts, but those low-level magical beasts don't have any intelligence. All their actions are based on their bestial instincts, so they simply don't know how to use magic cores. Jianqin sat on the horse's back, raising his head to look at the lush forest in front of him. He murmured, "In the future, this forest will become a training ground." After saying that, Jianqin directly dismounted from the horse's back, reaching out his hand to gently stroke the horse's head. He didn't care if this white horse that had followed him for a few days could understand his words. He said in a low voice, "In the future, you are free. You can go wherever you want." After saying that, Jianqin turned and strode into the forest. Hiss! The white horse behind him fiercely dug one of its front hooves into the ground. Staring at Jianqin's back, it let out a long neigh, as if bidding farewell to Jianqin. After walking for a distance, Jianqin finally stepped into the forest. Then, without stopping, he continued to walk into the depths of the forest, towards the magic beast mountain range. Weeds were everywhere in the forest. Everywhere was half a person's height or even taller than a person's height, completely blocking one's line of sight. In such an environment, the slightest carelessness would cause one to lose their way. Jianchen walked a certain distance, leaping onto a large tree to observe the surrounding path, ensuring that he wouldn't stray or lose his way. And within the weeds, poisonous snakes would appear from time to time, but they would all be discovered by the exceptionally powerful god Jianchen first, easily dealing with them. After walking for 4 hours, Jianchen finally arrived at the depths of the forest, and here, a few fierce, wild beasts gradually appeared. At this moment, a dark green figure leapt out from the weeds, attacking Jianchen's back with extreme speed. Then, just as this dark green figure approached Jianchen's body, a silver-white light flashed, and a bright silver longsword suddenly appeared, accurately piercing the dark green figure's body at an even faster speed. The long sword was withdrawn upon contact. Then Jianchen's feet swayed slightly, his body moving half a meter to the side. Just as he moved, a light pung sounded, and this dark green figure fell where Jianchen had just been standing. It was only at this moment that he could clearly see that this dark green figure was actually a wild beast that looked like a leopard. At its neck, there was already blood dripping. There was a deep, bloody hole, and torrential blood was surging out of it. Jianchen's gaze swept over this leopard, like wild beast lying on the ground, and then continued to hurry into the depths of the forest. He could see at a glance that this was only a wild beast, not even a first-rank magical beast. There was no magic core in its body at all. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so easily killed by him. Roar! Awoo! As Jianchen continued to go deeper into the forest, the roars of magical beasts gradually sounded out from all around the forest. There were all kinds of strange sounds, some of which were unpleasant to the ears, and some even sounded like the howls of evil spirits, causing one's hair to stand on end. At this moment, Jianchen's footsteps paused, and he turned his head slightly, his eyes flashing with a sharp light as he stared at his side, the silver white light wind sword appearing in his hand. This was the first time that Jianchen had shown such a serious expression since entering the forest. From where Jianchen's eyes were looking, a faint rustling sound could be heard, and then a yellow scorpion gradually appeared in front of Jianchen's eyes. This scorpion was very large. Just its body alone was 1 meter wide, 2 meters long, and the poisonous hook hanging from its tail was 5 to 6 meters long. On its head, there was a pair of small green eyes that flashed with a strange light. The scorpion flew straight towards Jianchen, and finally stopped 5 meters away from Jianchen. Its pair of eyes flashed with a strange light as it stared at Jianchen, and then it waved its pincers while letting out a ring sound. The silver white light wind sword in Jianchen's hand was shrouded in a layer of hazy sword aura, and he immediately made his move. His body turned into a blur as he shot towards the scorpion, the light wind sword in his hand, pointing straight at it. He had originally come here to hunt magical beasts, so now that he saw one, he naturally wouldn't hold back. The scorpion's reaction wasn't slow either, and just as Jianchen moved, the poisonous hook on its tail turned into a blur as it stabbed towards Jianchen with extreme speed. Ding! Jianchen's light wind sword collided with the scorpion's poisonous hook, and along with the sound of metal colliding, the strong recoil from the collision caused Jianchen's light wind sword and the scorpion's poisonous hook to be pulled back at the same time. Jianchen's body slightly swayed, and he had already retreated a few meters. His eyes were filled with surprise as he looked at the scorpion's poisonous hook. The hardness of this poisonous hook was beyond his expectations, and according to his calculations, even ordinary iron would not be able to compare to the hardness of this scorpion's poisonous hook. Moreover, the strength of this poisonous hook was also very great. After the collision with the poisonous hook, Jianchen felt a burst of numbness in his arms. Chapter 86. Although Jian Shen had killed quite a few Class 2 magical beasts in Kargath Academy. The Class 2 magical beasts that were far inferior to the magical beasts native to the mountain range of magical beasts. The Class 2 magical beasts in Kargath Academy might not even be comparable to some of the Class 1 magical beasts in the mountain range of magical beasts, let alone a Class 2 magical beast native to the mountain range. While Jianshin was in a daze, the scorpion didn't give him any time to think. Its 6 thick and powerful legs dug into the ground, and in the blink of an eye, it had crossed the distance of several meters and arrived in front of Jianshin. It opened its huge pincers that glowed with a poisonous green light, aiming for Jianshin's head. This was the first time that Jianshin was facing a magic beast that was born and bred in the magical Beast Mountain range. So he didn't dare to be careless. Although he had never met a magic beast that was born and bred in the magical Beast Mountain range, he understood this principle very well. Jianshin's face became a little serious. He tilted his head slightly, dodging the scorpion's pincers by a hair's breadth. He then stomped on the ground, leaving behind a deep footprint. His body was already shooting towards the scorpion's head, which was much smaller than its body. The light wind sword in his hand was covered in a layer of hazy white light, and the tip of the sword was about to reach the scorpion's small eyes. The eyes, throat, and heart were the 3 weak points of any creature. Jianshin was very clear on this point. At this moment, because of the angle of the scorpion's neck, it would be very difficult to stab it. Moreover, the scorpion's neck was not very long, so Jianshin could only choose to attack the scorpion's eyes. Although Jianshin had a lot of confidence in his attacks, some magic beasts also had very strong defenses. Jianshin wasn't 100% sure that he would be able to pierce through the scorpion's neck and injure it. Jianshin's speed was very fast. All that could be seen was a flash of silver lightning, and the tip of his sword was already in front of the scorpion's eyes. Just as Jianshin's light wind sword was about to pierce the scorpion's eyes, the scorpion suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a pungent green poison. It was as if it was being controlled by a mysterious force and quickly enveloped Jianshin. At the same time, the scorpion's eyes suddenly closed, and its head shook with all its might to avoid Jianshin's light wind sword. Jianshin's light wind sword was incomparably fast. At this critical moment, even though the scorpion tried his best to dodge, he still couldn't completely avoid it. In the end, the light wind sword pierced through the scorpion's eyes. When the light wind sword came into contact with the scorpion's closed eyes, it stopped for a moment. But in the next moment, the light wind sword's sharp sword chi broke through the scorpion's defenses and successfully pierced through the scorpion's eyes. At the same time, Jianshin's entire body was covered by the green poison mist. Hiss! With the corner of his eye injured, the intense pain caused Scorpion to let out a very unpleasant and hoarse cry. Dark green liquid slowly flowed out from the wound in his eye. In his wide open mouth, the sharp and small needle-like teeth that were exposed looked so terrifying. The poison mist slightly swayed, and the shrouded Jianshin retreated with lightning speed. Compared to before, Jianshin's current appearance was like the difference between heaven and earth. His entire body was covered with a layer of dark green poison, and the coarse clothes he wore were rapidly dissolving. Even the hair on his head that was originally not very long had turned into strands of green silk. Feeling the burning pain from his body, Jianshin's face became very serious. What a strong poison! After saying this, Jianshin quickly tore off the coarse clothes on his body that had been corroded by the poison. He then used his Saint Chi to resist the poison's damage. Jianshin glanced at the blinded poison scorpion, who constantly cried out in pain. He understood that this was the perfect opportunity to kill poison scorpion. Afterwards, a powerful killing intent flashed through his eyes. He did not even bother to take out new clothes from his space ring and put them on. Just like that, he charged forward with his sword naked and continued to attack poison scorpion. Jianshin's footsteps were light and nimble as he quickly arrived at Scorpion's side. With a shake of his arm, He extended it forward with lightning speed. The light wind sword in his hand turned into a silver light and pierced towards Scorpion's throat. The moment the light wind sword pierced out, the sword suddenly exploded with a powerful sword chi. Although it wasn't very strong, the sword chi was as sharp as a blade. It was as if a bolt of lightning had flashed through the air, leaving behind a dazzling radiance in the world. In the blink of an eye, it had disappeared without a trace. Ding! Jianshin's light wind sword accurately pierced through Scorpion's throat. When the tip of the light wind sword came into contact with the fine scales on Scorpion's neck, it let out a crisp sound like metal clashing against metal. However, these scales were not weak and only managed to block the light wind sword for a moment. In the next moment, the sword chi from the light wind sword had already pierced through the scales and pierced deep into Scorpion's throat. Hiss! Scorpion once again let out a hoarse cry. In his one good eye, a demonic green light continuously pulsed. His pair of thick and powerful pincers quickly clamped down on Jianshin. The 5 or 6 meter long poisonous hook on his back turned into a phantom as it circled around Jianshin's head and pierced towards the back of Jianshin's head. Jianshin pulled out the light wind sword from Scorpion's throat and jumped up onto Scorpion's back. Hiss! Hiss! Scorpion was clearly annoyed that Jianshin had jumped onto his back. His body began to violently sway left and right as he let out an unpleasant hiss while waving his pincers in front of him. Judging from Scorpion's current state, Jianshin's attack on his throat did not seem to have caused him much damage. Looking at Scorpion, who was still as vigorous as ever, Jianshin's eyebrows slightly wrinkled. He could not help but say in a deep voice, "His life is really strong. He actually didn't die." Because Scorpion's body was too large and Jianshin was limited by his own strength, he could not think of any other way to deal with Scorpion other than attacking its eyes and throat. At this time, Jianshin heard a slight sound piercing through the air. Hearing this sound, Jianshin did not hesitate and dodged to the side. Just as Jianshin dodged, a poisonous hook that flickered with a jade green light had already pierced through his scalp. In the end, it stabbed into the Scorpion's own back. With a light sound, Scorpion's back was covered with a layer of armor that was not weak. In front of the sharp poison hook, it was easily pierced through. The sharp poison hook pierced deep into Scorpion's body, causing dark green blood to violently flow out. Seeing this scene, Jianshin's expression became sluggish. However, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. He really did not think that Scorpion would be so stupid as to actually injure itself. The Scorpion tried to pull out the poisonous hook, but because the barbs on the poisonous hook had pierced deeply into its flesh, it pulled out some of its flesh. The Scorpion was in so much pain that it kept screaming in pain. Its whole body was trembling, and the intense pain made it give up on the idea of pulling the poisonous hook out of its body. Every time a person or creature was seriously injured, there would be a buffer period. During this period of time, their strength and reaction speed would be the most clumsy. Jianshin saw this and took advantage of the opportunity to flip in the air and jump down from Scorpion's back. The light wind sword in his hand turned into a silver light as it pierced towards Scorpion's other eye. At this time, Scorpion's reaction speed was much slower than usual due to the intense pain coming from his back. Furthermore, Jianshin's sword was extremely fast. In Scorpion's current state, it was very difficult for him to dodge or block Jianshin's lightning-fast sword. The light wind sword did not stop and accurately pierced into Scorpion's other eye. Jianshin's face lit up with joy. He immediately used more strength in his hands to push the light wind sword deeper into Scorpion's eye. In the end, half of the light wind sword's length had pierced into Scorpion's eye, injuring its brain. This time, Scorpion no longer struggled or resisted. His entire body trembled violently a few times before his legs gave way. His huge body that was more than a meter tall fell to the ground with a loud thud. Jianshin slowly pulled out the light wind sword. Looking at the sword that had been dyed green by the scorpion's green blood and white blood, he couldn't help but frown. With a thought, the light-winged sword fell from the sword and returned to its original appearance. Genshin's eyes scanned the corpse of Scorpion a few times before he waved the light-winged sword towards its head. But just as the light-winged sword was about to hit the Scorpion's head, it was blocked. Although the Scorpion was already dead, its shell was still very strong. Genshin's casual attack was unable to break through its defense. Chapter 87. Looking at the monster core in his hand that was slightly larger than a thumb, Genshin couldn't help but smile. He said in a low voice, "It really is a Class 2 monster core. Looking at the purity of this energy, it's much stronger than the monster cores of the magical beasts in Kargath Academy. It seems like the magical beasts in the Magical Beast Mountain Range are much stronger than the magical beasts in Kargath Academy. That's not unreasonable." After putting away the monster core, Genshin lowered his head to look at his body. Currently, his body had completely turned dark green, but even so, Genshin's body wasn't injured in the slightest. Because he had been using the special cultivation method recorded in the Azulite Sword Codex to temper his body since he was young, his body was extremely tough. Therefore, although the poison spat out by the poisonous scorpion could make Genshin feel pain, the poison was unable to invade his body. In addition, Genshin had deliberately used his Saint Force to counteract the poison's damage to his body. As a result, although Genshin's body was currently covered in a layer of dark green poison, his body was completely fine apart from feeling a bit of burning pain at the beginning. Genshin looked around and listened attentively for a while before muttering, "There shouldn't be any water nearby, so there's no way to clean this thing on my body. Looks like I'll have to take care of it carelessly." Next, Genshin plucked some leaves from a tree and used them to clean the thin layer of poison on his body. He then took out a new set of clothes from his spatial belt and changed into them. Although it was rare to see human figures in the vast magical Beast Mountain Range, Genshin still didn't have the hobby of being naked. After changing his clothes, Genshin directly left. He didn't bother with the corpse of the poisonous scorpion lying on the ground. Although the corpse of a magical beast and some of its important parts could be sold for quite a bit of money, this poisonous scorpion was only a Class 2 magical beast at most. It wasn't all that valuable. Even if he sold it, he wouldn't be able to get much money. Moreover, Genshin had quite a lot of purple coins on him, so he didn't care about that little bit of money at all. Although the magical beasts that grew in the Magical Beast Mountain Range were much more powerful than the ones that grew in Kargath Academy, the number of magical beasts that roamed around here was much less compared to Kargath. After all, although the Magical Beast Mountain Range wasn't the largest in the Tianyuan continent, it still occupied an extremely vast area. The magical beasts were scattered throughout the mountain range, so it wasn't impossible to encounter multiple magical beasts in the same place. It was just extremely rare. Genshin slowed down his pace for the entire afternoon, carefully venturing deeper into the Magical Beast Mountain Range. Even when night fell, Genshin only discovered 2 magical beasts. Aside from the scorpion that he first encountered, which was a Class 2 magical beast, the other 2 were both Class 1 magical beasts. At night, a bright moon hung high in the sky, sprinkling down bright moonlight. However, the Magical Beast Mountain Range was still pitch black. It was so dark that one couldn't even see one's own fingers. The dense foliage blocked the sky, preventing the weak moonlight from shining in. In a place where the terrain was relatively flat, a bonfire burned fiercely, constantly flickering in the pitch-black night. Genshin sat cross-legged in front of the bonfire, holding a branch in his hand. A large piece of meat was skewered on the branch, and under the constant roasting of the flames, the color of the meat was constantly changing into a golden yellow. Drops of fat were squeezed out of the meat, dripping into the bonfire below with a sizzling sound. After filling his stomach, Genshin took out some medicinal powder with a special smell from his interspatial ring and sprinkled it all around. This medicinal powder was something that every mercenary who entered the magic beast forest had to prepare. When they rested at night, they sprinkled it all around to effectively prevent the majority of poisonous insects and snakes from harming them. Of course, this medicinal powder was only effective against ordinary wild beasts. It had no effect on magic beasts at all. After sprinkling the powder, Jianqin directly jumped onto a large tree and sat cross-legged on a relatively flat branch. He then took out another type of white powder with a faint fragrance from his space belt and casually sprinkled some on his body. This white powder could effectively isolate the scent on his body and prevent it from leaking out at night and attracting wild beasts. After all, whether it was wild beasts or magical beasts in the magical beast mountain range, their sense of smell was especially sensitive. Although this powder couldn't completely block out the scent emitted from Jianqin's body, it could at least hide from the smell of ordinary wild beasts. This was because there were many wild beasts in the magical beast mountain range besides magical beasts. The reason why they were called wild beasts was because they didn't have magic cores in their bodies and their strength didn't reach the first rank. It was the same principle as humans who didn't condense a holy weapon in their bodies to become saints. Although wild beasts weren't very strong, and those who had the courage to enter the magical beast mountain range could easily hunt them down, no one would want to be disturbed by wild beasts when they were cultivating or sleeping at night. Therefore, almost every mercenary who entered the magical beast mountain range or wanted to spend the night in the wilderness would prepare some of this powder. After the safety preparations were completed, Jianqin directly took out a large amount of magic cores from his space belt. Holding a few pieces in each hand, he slowly closed his eyes and began to absorb the energy within the magic cores to cultivate. The energy within the magic cores leaked out at an extremely terrifying speed and finally rushed into Jianqin's body through his pores and nostrils. Such a rapid absorption of the energy within the magic cores naturally put some burden on Jianqin's body, causing his pores to swell painfully. He felt as if there wasn't a single part of his body that didn't hurt. However, this kind of pain was nothing to Jianqin, who had an extremely strong willpower. The energy within the magic cores carried a wild element, and under Jianqin's crazy absorption of the energy within the magic cores, the wild element within the energy quickly gathered in his body. If not for the fact that Jianqin had been using the energy of heaven and earth to transform his body from a young age, causing his internal organs and meridians to be much stronger than others, just the wild element within the magic core's energy would have caused serious damage to his body. As the huge amount of energy within the magic cores was constantly absorbed by Jianqin, the wild element within the energy also gathered in Jianqin's body more and more. However, when the wild element reached a certain level, a suction force suddenly appeared from Jianqin's dantian, pulling the wild element towards his dantian. In the end, it was absorbed by the two spots of light, one purple and one green. On the Tianyuan continent, if a fighter began to cultivate by absorbing the energy within the magic cores, they would first have to remove the wild element hidden within the magic cores, leaving only pure energy for themselves to absorb. During this period of time, just removing the wild element within the energy would take quite a lot of time. Moreover, the wild element within the energy could not be completely removed, leaving behind certain hidden dangers within the body. As a result, although there were many fighters on the Tianyuan continent who began to cultivate by absorbing the energy within the magic cores, there was no one who could endure it endlessly. They would have to stop every few days or even a dozen days to completely refine the energy within their bodies in order to prevent any future troubles. It could be said that Jianqin did not have to worry about absorbing the energy within the magic cores at all. Perhaps it was because of the two spots of light in his dantian, but as soon as the energy within the magic cores entered his body, the wild element hidden within the energy that was intimately connected to the energy would be automatically separated, allowing Jianqin to absorb the energy without any worries. This gave Jianqin an extremely huge advantage in terms of cultivation compared to others, As the energy within the magic cores was constantly absorbed by Jianqin, Jianqin could clearly feel the ball of Saint Force in his dantian grow at a visible rate. Although it seemed very slow, Jianqin knew very well that this speed was already fast enough compared to others. If he cultivated at this speed, it would not take long for him to break through the Saint Realm and reach the Great Saint Realm. The next day, when the sun shone through the dense foliage, Jianqin slowly opened his eyes as he cultivated on a large tree. Afterward, he leapt down from the tree and landed firmly on the ground. Jianqin moved his body and sensed the Saint Force in his body with his mind. Afterward, he could not help but smile with satisfaction. He could clearly feel that the Saint Force in his body was much stronger than when he had just condensed his Saint weapon. According to his estimation, his strength had probably reached the level of an intermediate saint. Although he was only an intermediate saint, it had only been less than a month since Jianqin had condensed his Saint weapon and broken through to the Saint realm. If others knew that Jianqin had used less than a month to reach the level of an intermediate saint, they would definitely find it hard to believe. After casually eating something to fill his stomach, Jianqin set off on his journey once more. Time quickly passed, and in the blink of an eye a month had passed. At the base of the mountain range of magical beasts, a youth dressed in coarse clothing was currently locked in a stalemate with a pitch-black, 1 meter tall, 3 meter long, leopard-type magical beast. The young man held a slender, silver-white sword in his hand. His tall figure stood there, but he gave off a sense of steadiness like a mountain. His face was covered in mud and dust, so it was impossible to see his appearance from the surface. Chapter 88. Roar! Suddenly, the magic beast that looked like a leopard let out a low roar. It stomped hard with its hind legs, leaving a shallow mark on the ground. Its whole body turned into a black shadow and shot toward the young man who was less than 10 meters away from it. In midair, the black leopard opened its bloody mouth. Its exposed sharp teeth flashed with a cold light that made one's heart tremble. The young man's eyes revealed a trace of a sneer. The silver-white sword in his hand suddenly emitted a layer of hazy white light. Then, with a wave of the sword, a silver-white light separated from the tip of the sword and shot towards the Black Panther's wide, open mouth. The speed of the sword was very fast, like a flash of lightning, but the Black Panther's reaction was not slow. Just as the silver-white light was about to reach its mouth, the Black Panther's head slightly tilted to the side. It just so happened that it dodged the oncoming sword ray. Even so, the sword ray still brushed past its head, leaving a clear bloody wound on the Black Panther's furry head. However, the Black Panther's speed did not decrease in the slightest, and it still maintained its previous speed as it shot towards the young man in front of it. The corners of the young man's mouth curled up slightly, as if to show a trace of ridicule. Then a fierce killing intent flashed in his eyes, and the silver-white, slender sword in his hand turned into a flash of lightning, piercing towards the Black Panther's throat. The speed of the sword was extremely fast, so fast that the Black Panther had no time to dodge. Before the Black Panther could even react, the silver-white sword had already pierced its throat. In the end, because of the Black Panther's forward momentum, the sword that pierced its throat continued to penetrate deeper and deeper until the Black Panther's throat reached the hilt of the sword. The other end of the sword was already covered in blood. It broke through the back of the Black Panther's neck and stabbed diagonally. Drops of blood continuously dripped onto the Black Panther's back. The young man slowly pulled out the long sword that had pierced into the Black Panther's body. Then, the blood that stained the silver-white long sword strangely gathered at the tip of the sword. Finally, the blood dripped from the tip of the sword and dripped into the soil on the ground. In the blink of an eye, the long sword that was originally covered in blood had become silver and flawless. And on the hilt of the sword, there were 2 unusually clean words, breeze. This young man was Jianqin, who had been wandering alone in the magic Beast Mountain Range. Unknowingly, he had been in the magic Beast Mountain Range for a month. During this month, Jianqin had been staying in the periphery of the magic Beast Mountain Range. He had not entered the depths of the magic Beast Mountain Range, nor had he gone out. During this month, Jianqin had been constantly moving about in the periphery of the magic Beast Mountain Range during the day and cultivating at night. During this time, Jianqin had been doing everything he could to increase his strength, unlike when he was in Changyang Prefecture, where he had slowed down in order to make himself less outstanding. As a result, as Jianqin's strength increased as much as he could, his own strength rapidly increased as well. After a month of cultivation, he had broken through mid and late saint, reaching great saint. In just a short month, Jianqin's strength had increased from a novice saint to a great saint. If news of this were to spread, it would definitely cause an uproar. This was because if an ordinary person wanted to go from a novice saint to a great saint, it would take them at least 2 or 3 years. Even some heavenly geniuses would need at least a year to go from a novice saint to a great saint. But Jianqin's terrifying cultivation speed was unheard of in the Tianyuan continent. Without anyone knowing, he had already set a record. But this record was destined to be buried, and no one would know about it. After becoming a great saint, Jianqin's battle prowess had also increased by leaps and bounds. At this time, killing second-rank magic beasts was a very easy task for him. Now, he had set his sights on third-rank magic beasts. With the light wind sword in his hand, Jianqin lightly flicked the head of the Black Panther. Immediately, a round bead stained with a little bit of blood and white powder jumped out of the Black Panther's head and was caught by Jianqin. He did not pay attention to the specks of blood and white dust on the bead. He casually pulled up a large amount of grass from the ground and wiped the blood and dirt off the bead, revealing a translucent bead. Looking at the bead for a while, Jianqin's face revealed a trace of a smile as he muttered to himself, "Today's luck is really good. This is already the 12th second rank Magic Beast Core." Putting away the Magic Beast Core, Jianqin didn't pay any attention to the Black Panther's corpse and directly left the area. Jianqin carefully advanced through the magical Beast Mountain Range. Although his strength had reached the Great Saint realm and could be said to be much stronger than before, he still didn't dare to be careless in the slightest. This was because he was very clear in his heart that even though he was only in the outskirts of the magical Beast Mountain Range, there were still some powerful magic beasts that came out from the depths of the mountain range. They weren't something that the current Jianqin could deal with. Jianqin could be said to be very vigilant in the magical Beast Mountain Range. He was always paying attention to the surrounding situation, especially the swamps hidden in the ground. These swamps were difficult to see with the naked eye. Looking from afar, they looked no different from normal land, but once you walked over, you would be swallowed by the swamps. Once you fell into a swamp, it would be very difficult to escape without someone's help. At this time, Jianqin's ears slightly moved. Immediately, a trace of joy appeared on his face as he couldn't help but exclaim, "Water! There's the sound of flowing water. There's actually water nearby." Saying this, Jianqin impatiently rushed towards the direction of the sound. After a short distance, when Jianqin passed through a patch of weeds, he finally encountered a flowing stream. This stream was about 3 meters wide and wasn't deep. The stream water was so clear that one could see the bottom. Even some of the brightly colored stones at the bottom of the stream could be seen clearly. When he saw this stream, Jianqin's face also showed a trace of joy. This was the first time he'd seen a water source since entering the magical Beast Mountain Range. And after staying in the magical Beast Mountain Range for so long, the water he'd prepared in his space belt was almost finished. If he still couldn't find a water source, Jianqin planned to leave this magical Beast Mountain Range. Jianqin looked around. After confirming that the surroundings were safe, he took out several water bottles from his space belt. Then he stood in front of the stream and dug to get water. After filling the water bottles, Jianqin directly took off his clothes and jumped into the stream to wash off the sweat that had accumulated on his body these past few days.